When did you stop, chuckle, and think to yourself,
I'm in danger?
When a car jumped the median and was barreling right towards me doing well over 70. Luckily, horsepower saved me from death. My first instinct was to floor it. At least have them hit the rear door and panels instead of the driver's side door. I was the only one in the car. When I was 7, I was playfully pushing a sheep and he pushed forward. Next thing I know, I'm against a wall, sheep head on my chest, and 5 seconds later I realize he's too strong for me. I literally thought I was going to die right there. Death by floof. Driving 50 miles per hour in a little VW Jetta and a huge SUV was stopped at a crossroad up ahead. Apparently they didn't see me and they started across the road. Thank God I hit the gas instead of the brake or I probably would have T-boned them. Instead, they smashed my back left tire and sent me spinning to a stop in the opposite lane of traffic. It was also really lucky I had no oncoming cars in that moment. Funny though, I was so dazed I remember thinking, who was that screaming? I'm the only one in the car. Then I realized that it was me. Such a strange feeling. A homeless girl grabbed me from a bar and said she needed an ambulance because her friend had taken too much of something. I followed her and started phoning one. She led me to an abandoned building. All that was going through my mind was, someone needs help. When she led me to some stairs, she said we needed to go up them, and my brain finally kicked in and I realized it could easily be a trap. Even if it wasn't, I wasn't going to walk into a smack den, and I was far enough into the building where escape wasn't easy. I leaned over a candle and set my t-shirt on fire. I thought it was really interesting and turned to my friends saying, "Hey, look everyone, my t-shirt's on fire." Fortunately, one of them had more presence of mind than I did and put it out. About 19,000 feet or 5.7 kilometers up in Tanzania. Felt incredibly drowsy while taking a rest and I started dreaming. The guide slapped me on the arm. "Don't sleep, you die." The chuckle and "I'm in danger" came when I realized I felt so awful that I might actually choose sleep anyway. It was altitude sickness. I chucked up my undigested breakfast 10 minutes later and felt a bit better. Yep, it takes resources for our bodies to turn food into energy. I'm a little concerned about what would happen if you were unable to eat because of the altitude though. Good thing you had a decent guide with you. They're there to save us adventure tourist idiots from ourselves. In Iraq in 2004, my unit was tasked with pushing from Hit to Fallujah in order to find and destroy Muqtada al-Sadr's Mahdi army. In one of the cities we cleared, we were about to assault a 5-story building that Intel had informed us was defended by more than 100 insurgents. We were stacked up outside a medium-high wall that surrounded the building, and I was carrying my saw, which is like a 20-pound weapon. I got a boost over the wall and immediately fell into and got stuck in a thorny bush. I remember thinking, oh man, what a stupid way to die, as I started waiting to get shot at. Turns out that this insurgent stronghold was actually a school with 2 friendly dudes in it. In short, Intel sucks. Later on in that same mission, we were doing a sneaky night patrol and we had to cross a highway that had crash barriers in lines on the median. I tried to roll over the barrier wearing a backpack, and it got perfectly lodged in the space between the barriers. Stuck there like a turtle while I tried to whisper shout to someone to come save me. A smackhead got out of prison and went to visit his girlfriend. She'd moved out about 2 years earlier and I'd moved in. So at 1 a.m. there's a clearly drunk nutjob, possibly also on substances, trying to break down my front door while my wife and kids are asleep, somehow. I hadn't put the bolts on the door yet as I was only just on my way to bed when he turned up. It was kind of funny, but I still got the cricket bat out just in case. Hey, the same thing happened to me. I was walking into my apartment building one day when I saw a guy start to walk in. I'd only been gone like 5 minutes, so I yelled at him, "Get the frick out of my apartment!" So this big Hispanic dude turns back towards me and says he's looking for so-and-so. I tell him they don't live here anymore, even though I occasionally get his junk mail. Big dude tells me he's fresh out of jail and the former resident owes him money. I tell him that's fine, but he doesn't live here anymore. He looks and tells me that my apartment looks like his and that if I'm covering for him, he'll be coming back. I tell the guy that's fine and that I won't see him later because once again, he doesn't live here. There was this time on a school bus, we had a new driver. The area is pretty hilly, and in this route we had the steep 50-foot drop from where the bus turned around with a 3-point turn. But the bus driver just kept backing up. Closer and closer, we almost went off the cliff. I'm sure that if we measured, it was within a foot. I started looking at exits, how fast I could run to the front or the side exit. Man, we were all screaming in terror. Good times. I took an out-of-bounds ski trail that looked fun by myself because intelligence is my strong suit. Came upon a tall cliff with a flat landing that I knew I couldn't make on skis, but I'd come too far to hike back to the main path. Took my skis off, tossed them over, and climbed down. Hurt my legs, but nothing serious. Continued on. Several minutes later, came upon a sign pointing towards a 20-kilometer bike trail ending God knows where. It was around that time I realized I could end up lost in the back country of a ski resort with no cell reception. Decided to hike in the opposite direction the sign was pointing since it was uphill and seemed more likely to take me back to the main trail. After several whispered swears and a good half hour of biking uphill, and across a sketchy-looking wooden bridge, through deep snow in ski boots holding my skis, I arrived at a populated ski run. I now make sure to have someone with me for all backcountry-related adventures. That way, if I die, I can bring them down with me. I was doing aid work in Croatia in the late 90s, only a few years after the war had ended. Our group was staying in a small village about an hour outside of Zagreb, which had been caught up in the conflict. Lots of shelled houses, mines in the countryside, even the main bridge had been blown up, so residents had to use an army makeshift bridge if they wanted to cross the river. We'd made friends with the locals and they took us down to the river where we had a fun time swimming and mucking about. I totally underestimated the river current and my ability to swim. So I start trying to cross the river and the current just picks me up. Whoosh! And suddenly I'm on my butt trying to swim against it. No deal. When I realized this, I started trying to get footing, but I'm being swept downstream and my feet are literally hitting rocks, no grip at all. It seemed like forever, but it was probably about 5 to 10 seconds. I hit a shallow calm patch of the river where I could stand up. When the guys came over, they were telling me it was no big deal, but had I been swept a little bit further down the stream, I would have hit a heavily mined area and probably been blown to bits. I metaphorically crapped myself. That's the closest I've come to losing my life. Really shook me up. I worked as an animator in a hotel. During the season, the mini club daycare is filled with kids, but post-season there's not even one kid in the hotel. So, post-season, one older lady and one middle-aged guy entered the empty daycare. The lady quickly explains to me that this guy is her mentally disabled son, who's mentally around 3 or 4 years old. He saw the daycare and really wanted to play there. Usually I wouldn't accept that, but there were no kids around, so I was actually happy that I'll be occupied for a while. He was really endearing, and we often watched Mickey Mouse DVDs since he was a big fan. After a few days of me hanging out with him, his mother came to pick him up and asked me how he was. I replied that he was nice as always, to which she replied, "Good, because he can get so very violent and aggressive sometimes." It sent chills down my spine, realizing that I was lucky, but that he'll also be coming to the mini club for the rest of their vacation. So there I was, day after day, playing with this guy twice as big as me, completely alone, doing everything he wanted and being more than careful that he just didn't get mad. Look, I get that this elderly woman had spent her lifetime caring and providing for her son at this point, but maybe that's the sort of information you disclose up front if there's any danger involved. Don't just drop him off and peace out even if you feel you deserve to. It's a hard situation to judge people for, but I think at least some warning about moods was warranted. When I decided to explore some lava tubes on an extinct volcano, Rangitoto if you're curious. I did this with no torch and bad footwear. It was extremely dark in there with no cell phone reception. I got completely disoriented and had to feel my way out because my phone was not as bright as I thought. No one knew where I was and I could have been in serious trouble. Stupidest thing that I've done recently. Me and my good friend Felix, both German, were traveling with an Interrail ticket through Europe. In Serbia, we were in a train which was going really slow and stopping at every really little town and village. For some reason, the train got shorter and shorter every other station because they were uncoupling a wagon here and there. So everyone moved to the first 2 wagons because they were most likely to arrive at the final destination. Felix and I were already in the second wagon in a closed cabin where there's a bench on the left and right. We were both sitting on the left bench having a cigarette when things suddenly got intense. 3 obviously drunk men came into that cabin. At first, they only asked for a cigarette, which we gave them, but after a few minutes, they started discussing more and more intensely. I could feel they were talking about us. So I asked Felix, whose father is Serbian, if he could understand them. He was pretty serious at that moment and told me that the 2 of them wanted to rob us, and one wanted to wait until after the train ride. Felix gave me a continuous update about what they were talking about. They were guessing how much money we might have and still discussing when to do the robbery. Their discussion heated up, and at one point they stopped completely. I was wondering what happened, and then suddenly it all went black. We were in a frickin' tunnel. I was totally flexed and expected to get the crap beaten out of me. They were only talking like 3 sentences. I asked Felix, "Are they going to do it now?" He said, "I'm not sure." After what felt like 10, but probably was 2 minutes, the light came back and I was sitting there like a frickin' Jackie Chan on my bench, prepared to fight in the dark. They knew now that we kind of knew. They decided to follow us once we got to our destination so we could kind of chill during the ride. At our destination, we just sprinted into the next taxi and told him to go to the next city as fast as possible. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Calling an Uber in Houston right in the middle of a downpour. As a Brit who was staying there for work, I was only vaguely aware of the dangers of flash flooding, and being from a country with no real inclement weather, I obviously didn't take it as seriously as I should have. As Texas natives will no doubt confirm, when it rains hard there. At least it did that morning. I remember trying to call an Uber on the app, and a few drivers in a row cancelled on me. I was desperately trying to get back to my friend's house. I'd just spent the night with a woman, and I was doing the walk of shame. She did offer me to stay and wait it out at her place, but the rain wasn't too bad at that point and only really became dangerous midway through my journey home. It really did come out of nowhere and she couldn't have known. In any case, it would have been beyond awkward to hang around the whole day with someone I'd literally just met 12 hours previously. I would have swum home through gator-infested waters if I'd had to, so I didn't really have much choice and just persisted in requesting a driver. The guy who eventually did show up was a friendly Nigerian fellow who probably didn't really consider how dangerous it was. In the short journey from the front door to the cab, I got so soaked it looked like I'd been thrown in a lake. We were both chuckling like, haha, look at all this rain, until it got so bad that we literally couldn't see 1 yard in front of the car. By this point, we were on the freeway and basically trapped. And then we both started getting alerts on the Uber app that we were in a danger zone and to vacate immediately. Then we saw the water rising on the side of the freeway and cars starting to lose control. That's when both of our smiles dropped and it was like, oh yeah, people die in these conditions. We both might not be going home today. It probably sounds silly to people who have to deal with all this stuff all the time, but that was the only time in my life I've experienced the genuine fear of, there's a very real danger I could either drown or be sleeping in a community center this evening. Eventually, he did get me home and I've never been so grateful. He got a big tip from me and a hug. Decided to go on a day hike in a 17,000-acre wilderness area that I'd never visited before. Didn't tell anyone my plans, didn't take a map, didn't pack anything more than a Cliff Bar and a water bottle. There was no cell service and I didn't see anyone else all day. The trail system turned out to be pretty complex, and after a couple of hours I realized I was entirely lost. I tried to keep my panic down and kept just picking trails and walking until around dusk, where I happened to pop out onto a dirt road and was able to follow that road a couple of miles back to my car. I still kick myself for that one. I don't know what the frick I was thinking. At my best friend's going away party, drunker than I've ever been before or since, barely able to stand, when the bros collectively decided to pick me up and throw me in the pool. All I could do was grab a nearby screen door with one white-knuckled hand. The host is a big burly musclehead who'd just made sergeant. He stopped them and told them they were idiots. I was too drunk to swim, clearly. And then I blacked out. At first, the narrator was confused as to why a screen door was in the pool unless this was some kind of budget Titanic-themed party. Then I realized that you never actually made it to the pool, which in hindsight is probably a very good thing for everyone involved. When I was in med school and did my psych rotation, the first thing we were told was to never split up from our partner, so just in case of a dangerous situation with a patient, we'd have a second person there to help. I went to do an assessment on a patient, he seemed perfectly normal, and my partner judged that now would be a good time to use the restroom. The patient and I were having a pleasant-as-could-be conversation. He asks me to look at his drawings, which he had proudly hung up on the wall. I obliged, I like art as much as the next girl. I look and they're really nice. Then I turn around and find that the second thing we were told never to do, which is let the patient get between us and the doorway, had happened. And he was not seeming so friendly anymore, which is when I thought to myself, well, darn it, if I'm in a pickle now. This man is telling me he has to get out of here. I have to help him. And all of I don't even hear what at this point because I'm realizing how potentially screwed I am. But then I realized that I'd also done the third thing which we were told never to do, which was to keep our cell phones on us on the floor. I was just hoping at this point that I could keep this guy talking a little while I call my preceptor to save my dumb butt. My friend was at the same clinical site the following semester, and the preceptor used that as a cautionary tale to emphasize the first 2 rules and get rid of the third one. I swam from a beach out to a buoy, not even that far, maybe 200 meters from the beach. I'm a strong swimmer, so I thought I'd manage it easily. Something about the cold water and the current? I don't know, I was really struggling coming back with even trying to swim horizontally to the beach. I went all lightheaded and felt really tired, then just started thinking that this is it, I'm gonna drown, and how stupid I've been. Floated there for a bit, laughed to myself like a maniac about how dumb I was dying like this. Eventually, I snapped out of it and started swimming again. Ended up crawling back onto the beach. My partner asked how the sea was, and I just croaked, "Fine." We were on a patrol in Afghanistan in 2008 when we came under heavy fire. Our fire team took cover behind a low, loose stone and mud wall, unable to return any effective suppressing fire. The wall was slowly getting lower and smaller as it was peppered by small arms fire, and we knew that air support was coming, but it felt like we were in some crappy Indiana Jones scene. In those situations, it's the humor that stops you from crapping yourself. Me and my friend were scaling a cliff. He wanted to go around, which would take about an hour. I said we could climb it. Fast forward 10 minutes and I'm hanging off a cliff, 30 feet tall, and hanging onto it for dear life with 2 hands. I found the situation quite funny. I was so confident in my ability to climb it, and I lost my footing just as I got to the top. I was holding onto the rock for what felt like forever, most likely less than 2 minutes, until he managed to climb up and pull my butt up there. It was 3 years ago, I believe, when I was still in active service in Switzerland. I'm part of a tank crew. That day I was the designated loader for the cannon. We were doing live fire exercises, and as we fired, one of the gas extractor seals blew up. What this is, basically, is a circular rubber ring around the gas tube of the cannon. If you look up a Leopard A2 tank, it's the thick tube at the base of the cannon. It acts as a seal to prevent smoke backlash into the crew compartment, and instead vents it outside. This meant that the sealed crew compartment filled up with smoke and the acrid smell of cordite and essentially blinded us all. So here I am, a 25-kilo high-explosive shell in my arms that you don't want to drop on the floor, blinded and winded by smoke, thinking, well, this is how I die, apparently. Managed to fumble around, slot the shell back into the carry tray as well as engage the coaxial machine gun fan. It's mounted under the machine gun ejection port, and it pulled the smoke outwards when turned on. And I opened the top hatch to let it cycle out. Fun times. The first World Trade Center bombing. Ground floor, the explosion knocks me to my knees. I thought 2 subway trains had crashed below us. A couple of seconds later, the second explosion. I knew this was going to be a problem. I learned years later there was no second explosion, the tower just rang like a bell. It was the building reverberating back to the original bomb site. Went to work somewhere else not long after that. I was watching Archer on my laptop in college, had my headphones on, and in the episode there was an alarm going off. After about 3 episodes, I finally realized, hey, wait, why can I still hear that alarm? I looked up and saw that the end of my corridor was completely engulfed in flames, and the flames were coming at me quickly. Best part was like 40 people just walked by me after the alarm started and let me sit there. Nobody even bothered to warn me. I didn't take the chicken out of the freezer like she'd asked, and then my mum pulled into the driveway. I hunted wild pigs, or razorbacks, in Australia. Since I was a teenager, they wouldn't give me a rifle. They set a line of teenagers up with long poles and what looked like metal trash can lids to bang and make noise in a line formation. We stomp forward, pigs run the other way towards the hunters. In theory. Occasionally, a male, the ones with the horns, will have enough testosterone stored in their sacks to charge at us. That's when we're supposed to take the pole and push them away. Yeah, nah. Like 14-year-old idiot me dressed in a leather apron is going to push this 400-pound pork monster off me with a stick. Brown Man here took a trip to Big Bend National Park a few years ago with a bunch of green herb. Got to my campsite in view of the Rio Grande, high as frick, and realized I'm on federal land on the US-Mexico border with a not insubstantial quantity of a regulated substance. I've made a huge mistake. One night when I was in active addiction, I was drinking heavily and also taking a hefty dose of oxycodone. I felt my heart slow down to a crawl and I was having a lot of trouble breathing. Very easily could have died there, but I found it partly comedic in that moment. Don't do substances, kids. Was on a school trip to Austria, skiing. A guy who didn't like me and repeatedly picked on me came into my room with all of his mates and pushed me to a window. I thought it was just a joke until he put a knife to my throat. I instantly stopped laughing. He stared at me for a good 30 seconds and walked out of my room, which didn't have a lock on the door. I didn't sleep that night. That moment when you're gunning it up a hill on an ATV and you're about 90 degrees before the pinnacle, and you let off the gas too early because you thought you were going to flip backwards and everything perpetually slows and then goes completely still before the hill crest, and it's quiet and you know Newton's law, so you just chuckle and think, well, I guess we're going to roll backwards now and hope for the best. What's the most genius 4D chess strategic move you've seen someone execute at work or in life? In my youth, I posted at a bustling Dragon Ball Z message board. One year on April Fool's, I was messaged by a particularly popular poster that he would like help pranking the board. A particularly tasteless joke. He was going to have his girlfriend post that he was involved in a car accident. To help sell the lie, he wanted me to play devastated and to attack anyone who dared imply such a thing could be a prank, as I would be the only one who knew the truth. But here's the rub. He told everyone, about 80 people, that the accident was fake and that each of us was the only person in on it. And he told each person to react in a particular way, designed to put them in conflict with the other people he had told to act in a particular way. I was told to be devastated. Someone else was told to call bullcrap. Someone else was told that they were glad he's hurt. Someone else was told to say they were donating money for his recovery, etc. He just sat back and watched the board eat itself. It was pretty funny. We spread the word that we were all going to skip the last half of the day by leaving out the doors at the disused extreme ends of the school that they usually had difficulty monitoring. One of the NHS officers had a brother who was a fireman, whose chief was a bit of a safety and regulation stickler. Sure enough, we get to school that day, and the doors at the extreme ends of the building are chained shut. NHS guy calls his brother at lunch. This was prior to cell phones, so you had to wait to use a payphone, and reports a fire hazard. Locked fire exit doors. Result: Fire chief himself shows up and orders the high school evacuated, while he does a top-to-bottom inspection of the whole building. Adding insult to injury, a huge bunch of seniors took off during the evacuation. One of my co-workers at a previous job hated our boss. Guy was a suck-up to higher management, made our lives a living hell by not communicating actual requirements, etc., until it was too late. Then bad-mouthed design to upper management and the customer. My coworker did some digging and found an old copy of the guy's resume online, polished it up, and contacted a few recruiters. Boss got headhunted out of the company. We got a new boss who wasn't a gigantic butt, and everyone was happy. I don't know if I would personally consider it a smart move, but my boss had been having heart problems for a while. He was a quadruple bypass. He basically knew it was only a matter of time till his next heart attack. He told me he was going to make damn sure it happened on company property when it came. Sure enough, a couple of weeks ago, he punched in at 6 a.m., he normally comes in around 9:30 to 10, and less than 20 minutes later, he was in an ambulance. Haven't seen him since, but my buddy at HR says he's listed for workers' comp. Worked as a low-level shift manager of a truck stop restaurant for a couple of years. My higher-ups used to do monthly inspections for FMs and quarterly inspections from VPs to see if the facility was up to company standards. I used to have everything spotless prior to a visit, except for something benign yet obvious thing, left dirty. Like the top of the buffet was a little dusty, which was easy to tell with dark-stained wood, or left ice build up in the freezer. I did this so upper management would be distracted by the small oversight I had made, and would be less inclined to look harder for something to reprimand me on. It was a crappy corporation and were required to find something that I had to improve on every inspection. Not personally witnessed, but I'm in awe of this guy. Software dev busted for outsourcing his own job to China. Eventually, it was discovered the employee had outsourced his own job to a Chinese consulting firm, paying about $50,000 to the firm out of his own salary for several $100,000. In his blog, Mr. Valentine describes the employee as being in his mid-40s, with a relatively long tenure with the company, family man, inoffensive and quiet. Someone you wouldn't look at twice in an elevator, ABC News reports. In the blog, Mr. Valentine wrote that according to the man's web browsing history, a typical workday went something like this. 9 a.m. Arrive and surf Reddit for a couple of hours. Watch cat videos. 11:30 a.m. Take lunch. 1 p.m. eBay time. 2-ish p.m. Facebook updates. LinkedIn. 4:30 p.m. End of day update email to management. 5 p.m. Go home. My grandfather pulled this move in the 1960s. Not sure it's possible or even legal anymore, but it was back when business owners had personal relationships with their bankers. Gramps had commercial properties where he rented out office space to businesses. One of his tenants was failing and about to close shop and owed him a bunch of rent to the tune of thousands of dollars. They cut him a check for the rent owed, but asked him to wait a week to deposit/cash it. Gramps knew the company wouldn't be around in a week and he'd never see his money if he waited. He took the check to the bank, they both used the same bank, and tried to cash it. Sure enough, they didn't have enough to cover the check, and the teller told him she couldn't cash it because of insufficient funds. Gramps asked how much they were short, and the teller told him about $200. So Gramps took $200 out of his own wallet and had her deposit it into their account, then cashed his check for the thousands they owed him. The next day, the owners called him furious and in disbelief that he got his check cashed, and cleaned them out at the same time. Instead of lasting another week, they were out of business that day. But Gramps got his money. Well, when you sense you're about to be screwed, grab that screwdriver and go on the offensive, I guess. Maybe not totally genius, but close. I had a colleague who worked at a very large company who was on a temporary promotion to quite a senior position. It was a position that he knew a number of other people in the company were interested in applying for, many of whom were far more qualified than him. The day eventually came when the management decided to fill the post permanently and to start the process by looking for recruits from within the company. He now faced the very real possibility that the well-paid job he'd been doing for about a year might be taken from him and handed to someone from another department. To get the recruitment process underway, the local management asked him to write the ad for the job, which would then appear in the internal job vacancies listings on the company intranet. My colleague saw his opportunity and he seized it with both hands. Firstly, he changed the job title in a way that could be justified, but made the vacancy unrecognizable to anyone skimming through the listings who was specifically looking for it. Secondly, he started the ad by focusing on some of the more obscure aspects of the job, making it sound almost like an entirely different kind of role. He only got to the core parts of the job, that people might recognize, after about 3 paragraphs. It worked brilliantly. No one else applied for the job because it was impossible to identify it from a quick read of the title and opening paragraphs. My colleague was duly appointed to it after a successful interview. I should explain that what made this such a neat trick was that the ad was for a specialist job in a company that had quite a few specialists in that field, but was mostly full of generalists. My colleague changed the title to something that sounded very generalist and also wrote the first 3 paragraphs in a generalist way, only switching to the specialist information in paragraph 4. Why I think it worked so well was because the generalists who might have been drawn to the job by its title and opening paragraphs then gave up when they realized it required specialist skills that they lacked. Meanwhile, the specialists saw only the generalist title and immediately moved on to the next ad, not realizing that it could well have been the perfect job for them. I have been around a lot of manipulation and politicking at various workplaces. I can't stand it, so I don't delve into it. So suffice to say, probably the most genius stuff was happening around me, and I failed to notice it. However, something I was particularly proud of was, when compiling reports, spreadsheets, ad copy, etc., I always typed my name in the lower right-hand corner, but set the color to white. No one sees it, it doesn't print, but when someone, manager, sends off your files as his own work to the higher-ups, along goes your signature. It came up in a discussion once where they were debating his data with my own. He had apparently sent alternative ideas in an attempt to discredit my contributions and belittle my capabilities. In a one-on-one meeting, I had them highlight the bottom right corner of all the documents he had sent under his name. They all had my name in the corner. I was working for them 2 months later. New guy in a fancy suit shows up in the office and the company president says, "He's a consultant working for me, give him whatever he needs." Guy works with us for months, going out to lunch with us all the time, we're all getting on great. Then one day we're in the company meeting, when the president invites him up to the front of the room because he's my new boss, the VP of something or other. This guy steps out from the middle of our group like it's the big reveal of a TV show. He was undercover for the past couple of months. He asked the president to not announce his title during that time so he could investigate our department from the inside without us knowing. I'll add that while undercover, he worked in a cubicle over in the accounting department. Then, after the reveal, he moved into the executive suite. I was chosen as the representative of my senior class in a Scrabble tournament. I was against this junior girl who was the best player in the whole school. Now, I'm not exactly a pathetic player, but this girl was miles ahead in terms of Scrabble skills. It was a best out of 3 type of game, and I have already won the first round simply due to sheer luck. Halfway through the second game, however, I figured that I won't be able to win the round as my score isn't half of hers. So in order to invalidate the round, I purposely placed a wrong word in the board. I was graduating salutatorian for the whole senior class, so she really didn't think I'll get a word wrong, and let the whole game finish. Obviously, she won by a large margin. Lo and behold, one of the teachers came to check the game's progress, and he noted the non-existent word. As per the rules of the game, and the girl's insistence that she can't accept the win given the situation, we redid the whole second round. The next second round ended up in a tie, and by technicality, I actually won the whole tournament. This was probably the first strategic, albeit very manipulative thing I've done in my life. A German hacker once hacked the source code for Half-Life 2, a video game developed by Valve Corporation, before it released, and Valve was in total panic mode. Gabe Newell, the owner of Valve, however, had a brilliant plan. He messaged the hacker's anonymous profile and told him that he was really impressed by his software genius and wanted to hire him for a new project. Gaben even sent flight tickets to Seattle to him and got a resume for him. Unfortunately for the hacker, Gabe passed his resume on to the FBI and checkmate. Imagine thinking you were the Mike Ross of this situation, only to end up in the logical conclusion for the events you had set in motion. A friend of mine started dating a girl when he was 19 and she was 18. They met at work and over time a romance developed. They were crazy about each other, but there was one problem. She was very religious and he was an atheist. One afternoon, a group of us were hanging out, and someone asked her if it was hard between them with the religious stuff. She told them sometimes it is, but she wasn't worried. She said, "In 5 years, we will be married, have a kid, and he will be going to church with me twice a week." Everyone laughed, especially because they had only been dating a couple of months at the time. Well, she wasn't completely on target. It took her 7 years, and they were married, had a kid, and he had become hyper-religious. I had a friend who essentially engineered his marriage to a very wealthy girl. Her parents are worth tens of millions. He is an extremely intelligent person and, in my personal opinion, a total sociopath. A lot of people don't see it, especially at first, but he's extremely manipulative and is always roundaboutly getting people to do things for him. Anyway, he was a struggling artist and knows that this girl is loaded, so he just targeted her and eventually married her. I knew him pretty well at the time, and it was clear that he didn't really give much of a crap about her. He then convinced her to move to Manhattan, away from her family, so he could pursue his art career there. They moved into a huge apartment on the 20th floor of a high-rise, with an amazing balcony view. I always thought it was kind of effed up because his wife is very overweight, and I think that he used that as leverage in getting what he wanted. I don't know if it exactly fits the question, but it was kinda genius, if totally evil. Don't know the exact details, but I read a story once about a guy who bought a full-fare first-class ticket on an airline. He would go to the airport, hang out in the lounge to get free food and drink, then go down to the desk and reschedule his flight to the next day. Since it was top-tier first-class rate, the airline rescheduled with no fee. Kept doing this for something like a year until the airline caught on and told him they wouldn't reschedule anymore. At this point, he went to the desk and got his 100% refund for the ticket, since that was also airline policy. Crafty, manipulative little tykes, let me tell you. One kid absolutely had to sit in the front of the classroom. The reason for this is that he essentially controlled the other kids by giving them looks. If he was in the front, you at least had to tell because he turned around for a second or two, gave a look, and some kid chucked his maths book across the classroom. Also, after having a few classes with these kids, one kid stayed in the classroom during the break and I asked her what was wrong. Apparently 2 boys in the class were mean to her and calling her names, so I told her I'd tell the original teacher and/or the principal. I was only a sub after all and had no place disciplining children. As I talked to one of the teachers about it, I found out that the problem isn't the boys, it's 2 other girls in the class. See, these 2 girls would tell the boy to go bully this girl and be mean to her, not because they didn't like the girl, but because they wanted the boys to get told off and disciplined for whatever reason. The bullied girl was just a tool in their eyes. If I ever need a general to confuse and misdirect my enemies in conflict, I'd recruit a 9-year-old girl. I was a general manager at a small vape shop for a while. I asked the owner for a significant raise about a week before he was leaving the country on vacation. I would be solely in charge of the shop while he was gone. I dropped a hint to a sort of friend of his that I would be gone before he got back if I didn't get the raise. I got the raise. Depending on the size of this vendor's business, this seems a little exploitative. Maybe the owner looked for a new GM when he returned. I was playing Cluedo with a girl I was trying to impress and her friends. One of the guys in the friends group was her old crush. During one of my turns, I realized that this guy, highly intelligent mother flipper, is close to the guessing room. During my turn, I decide to ask next person for the cards that I had on my hand. Of course, no one had them, which would suggest that the place, weapon, and murderer are in the bag and are the solution to the game. He took the bait, went to the middle room and guessed all of the cards I had in my hand, effectively costing him the game. He was really surprised and couldn't fathom how that had happened, and this is when I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Unless I had all the cards I had asked for." I know it's petty, but it was enough to impress the girl at the time, and I still recall it fondly. This actually happened to me, and I don't know the actual truth of it, so this is an assumption. I was in a disciplinary hearing at a call center when I was about 20 years old for basically slagging off my manager. She was a member, to my colleague over chat. I said I would rather resign than get sacked. After the meeting, she went to see HR and asked if I would still prefer to resign. I resigned. In hindsight, 14 years later, I don't think I was getting sacked and she bluffed me into resigning, which is fantastic gamesmanship, and even though she was a complete and utter jerk, I respect that. My girlfriend lives in Australia and I live in the US. We don't spend much time together because of the distance, obviously, and because of the time difference in our schedules, we get limited, but fairly consistent amount of time we can spend together online, which is where we normally spend Skyping while playing games. Last summer, she was coming to spend about 5 weeks with me in the US, and we were both insanely excited. About a week before, my family was getting together for an early dinner, which wasn't very common as we all live on our own. My father picked me up to take me to the restaurant, and I walked in the door and saw her sitting with my mum and sister. I was absolutely speechless and couldn't even make a coherent thought. She had planned it out with my mum months in advance, and I had no idea. She sent me pictures and only messaged me at certain times so that I wouldn't catch on while she was taking the 30-hour trip over here. I cannot explain the happiness I felt and the shock I was in. In about 4 months, I'm moving to Australia to live with her, and I've never been happier in my entire life. Someone I know claims to have purposely left a pen cap leaning against a cash register drawer so that the next time their rival coworker opened the drawer, it would fall into the rail, obstructing it from closing. Leaving a register open is a big deal in retail, and apparently this had a domino effect, leading to my acquaintance to be named manager/head cashier. If I recall correctly, the cashier was on a last chance kind of thing, and was one of 2 who could work weekends. So once they were fired, the other person who currently occupied the manager/head cashier job was the other person who could work weekends, making the weekday job available, and by seniority and comparative responsibility, my acquaintance was promoted. Can't verify this actually happened, but the planning was impressive for such a low-stakes job. So I was studying this course in university, which had half of the course in practical assignments. We had to do 10 pracs throughout the semester, and the lecturer decided that the final grade you'd receive would be an average of the 10 submissions. Seemed fair. They had issues with the submission system, and so, trying to be fair, he added a rule where if you submitted late, the grade would be removed from the average. So all I did was submit the first prac on time, got full marks, submitted the rest late, and received an average grade of 100%. About 5 years ago, me and my friends went to Disneyland. One of my friends was a huge fan of the ride Big Thunder Mountain, but the line was like 150 minutes long. I issued 5 fast passes for all of us, and when the staff in the fast pass lane told us to show our passes, I told her I lost 3 of them. She checked the remaining 2 and let us go. Later, after we confirmed a different person was in charge, I showed the staff the 3 passes I was hiding. Basically, we cheated the system and rode the ride twice in the fast pass lane. So petty, yet so satisfying. I was forced to be acting manager for a company I was liking less and less. I had all the responsibility, but not the pay, and I was having to help interview actual managers. I hired someone from a company down the street, then applied there and got his job. That job was the perfect blend of a thing I was good at, well paid for, liked doing, and filled a need. Incidentally, it was my brother playing 2D chess against strangers online when we were little kids. He had an electric chessboard named Igor, and Igor was a mother flipper. We could never beat him unless he was on the lowest setting, and we played a lot of chess as kids. Anyway, my little brother set Igor to the highest level of difficulty and started a game online. The opponent made a move, and my brother would make the same move against Igor. Igor would respond, and he'd copy Igor's move in the online game. He never lost a game with this method. This guy is my hero. I remember the story from ages ago. A man gets a credit card contract through the post. Usual stuff, sign the contract and send it back, get the credit card. He changes the contract terms and conditions to like 0% APR, no limit, no late payment fees, etc. Basically, free money for life. The company doesn't check the contract, countersigns, and sends him the credit card. He maxes it out, the company stops the card, he sues the company, and wins. There is a well-known saying that goes, always give the hardest job to the laziest person because they will find the easiest way to do it. What is the best real-life example of this you have seen? I was once a temp at a tiny office on a construction site in around 2003. I was only there for one day while the regular person was on some training. They sat me down and told me that I just needed to copy all these numbers from one program to another. So I selected them, hit Ctrl-C and Ctrl-V. Turns out about 60% of this woman's time had been manually typing the numbers from one place to another. I work in finance at a large multinational corporation. I feel like a big part of our job is just stop doing things and wait to see who complains. If someone complains, we keep doing it. If silence, then we call it a controlled drop and put it on our performance review for creating efficiencies. I worked in a CNC shop. There would be a pile of jobs that needed to be done for the month. Some took days to run, while others were generally quick. The record for jobs done in one day was 8. What I did was looked through all the jobs and organized them by setup, meaning every job has a setup time. Can take an hour to get all the tooling together, setting up the cutting table, and setting the parts square to the table so the machine can gauge where the part is. So when I insert the code into the machine, it can run flawlessly and drill, mill, tap, whatever within literally hair measurement, for every single job. Majority of parts use standard tooling, and I have automatic tool changing with 20 pockets. Long story short, I figured out how to line up jobs so they all have the same setup. Blew the record out of the water with 30 jobs done in one day, saving the company tens of thousands of work hours. All because I didn't feel like doing all the setups that day. I worked at a summer at a mortgage company as an assistant to the underwriters. My only job was printing documents and then hole punching them to put in folders. They had a super fancy Xerox printer that basically did my entire job for me, but the underwriters at this company didn't know how to click through printer settings to make the machine hole punch as it was being printed. I showed them how to do it, and they resisted it super hard. Like they didn't trust it, I don't know. So I got to keep my job, but what was supposed to take me all day literally took me 20 to 30 minutes first thing in the morning. So they started assigning me real tasks, and even offered to keep me on to eventually become an underwriter too, because I was so sharp. I.e., I knew how to use the very expensive printer they already had. I was just about to start grad school, so I had to politely decline, but I'm pretty sure they didn't hire someone to replace me when I left. In conclusion, they had a printer that already did my job for me, but didn't know how to use it. I showed them. Maybe not the most impressive story here, but I thought it was a great sidestep of effort nonetheless. Coworker of mine had to get rid of smaller junk fiberglass boat with no trailer. Our other coworkers are all telling him how much time and money he's going to need to get rid of it, and he's just saying, "Oh, is that so?" He took off one day and sat down on his lawn with a cooler of beer. That day was garbage day. Inevitably, the trash guys rolled up. He hands each of them a cold beer and says, "Hey boys, got $50 for each of you if you help me out real quick." They fed the entire 12-foot boat into the packer, crushing 2 feet at a time. I used to process HSA claims around 10 years ago. One system we had to use back then was an old-as-hell terminal program that took 4-line items per page. That's it. For a usual claim, no big deal. Not too hard to keep track of things over 2 to 3 pages. For a longer claim, most fit on 1. However, we had the dreaded shoebox claims. This was the person who saved up every receipt all year in a metaphorical shoebox and sent everything in once a year to empty their account. We hated them. Dozens or hundreds of line items totaling thousands of dollars. Just because you only have $500 in your HSA doesn't mean we get to stop there. If you sent in $4,000 in receipts, I've got to account for all of it. Totally killed your numbers for the day, and they tracked claims per hour religiously. The main issue was double-checking that everything added up right when you were done entering it. At 4 items a page, it took forever to tally. So I made an Excel sheet. It was laid out so I could enter every single line, then run a macro that would calculate the needed totals and dump all the text to a text file formatted exactly, so I could select 4 items at a time and paste them directly into the terminal window from the default starting cursor positions, and every field would fill in automatically. Copy, paste, next, copy, paste, next, copy, paste, next, etc. It easily halved my entry times with way less work. Finding any typos was much easier. I just had to look at one column organized sheet instead of scrolling through God knows how many pages of terminal text. It was great. I showed it to my manager so the rest of my team could use it. She was horrified I would use something like that, as no human was double-checking as they went along. This despite demonstrable improvements to my error rates on large claims after I started using it. She ordered me to stop using it and forbid anyone else in her team from automating any part of their job at all. I kept using it for all of the 2 months I stayed there after that. I had some of the highest claim per hour numbers and lowest error rates on her team. I never developed any more tools for them. Flip her. I wonder if this individual ever got found out, but hopefully if they have, their results speak for themselves. Worked as a cashier during the holiday season back when I was 16. The supermarket was selling drinks by the boxes, and at that time we only had barcode scanners that was at the front of the computer. No gun-type scanners existed. I was lazy and didn't want to carry boxes up to the scanner, so I politely asked the customers if I could carve out the barcode from their box to scan and keep. Some agreed, some didn't want to, but eventually I managed to amass all the barcodes needed, labeled them and kept them in a file for easy reference. Apparently, some other cashier got green-eyed at my smart move and complained to the chief cashier, who promptly lectured me on, bullcrap alert, how it's dangerous for me to scan such barcodes as I might scan the wrong things. She told me to throw it all away and carry the boxes like I was meant to. I mean, I was young, so I could, but the other cashiers were older and some were elderly and needed the customers themselves to help carry the boxes to the scanner. But whatever, I guess jealousy trumps common sense. Was a temp. Got hired for the day to print 30 packets with 100 pages each. Why would it take a day? I asked. Our printer doesn't collate the pages, so it will take you the day to sort the pages into the 30 packets, they said. Right. It was a standard office Xerox printer. It took me all of 30 seconds to find and click the collate button, clicked the staple button while at it. All got printed by itself into a nice stapled packet, and I got paid to browse internet for the day. They thought I was a genius for fixing their printer and gave me glowing recommendations to the temp agency that led to more jobs. Well, there's our second just use the feature included in the office equipment story for the day. Funny that. At my last job, a truck suspension shop, we did inventory every December and it was someone's job to count out all the washers and screws of every size. It was my first inventory and I casually mentioned that they should just weigh one screw or washer, then weigh them all and divide the weight to get the count. Everyone looked at me like I had given them the key to the universe. Counting washers and screws went from a day or two to just a few hours. Herding yak with a drone takes the cake for me. They run from it and oddly fear it, which is surprising considering they have literally 0 aerial predators. We only did it a few times because it really makes them uneasy and it doesn't treat them well. But it is very effective and easy, and you can herd them from over half a mile away from inside the house. Automated 70% of my job in a large finance firm as an intern. Never disclosed it and got easy money for 6 months. I spent the time doing courses and applying for my grad school. Got my admission letter during the final 2 weeks of my internship and never looked back. Pro tip, Python and Excel can be your best friend. Worked in a huge hotel by the airport. We had a layover with over 400 people. I think we were 3 employees. They had buffet for dinner and then left to go to bed since it was 1 or 2 a.m. Rule was we should always go to the room and pick up as many plates as we could and then bring them to the cleaner. Took us ages and I wanted to go home. I decided to roll out the cart and collect the plates and put them on the cart. Guests were seeing it and started putting their plates on the cart when they left. All of a sudden, hundreds of people cleaned up their own stuff. Duty manager saw it and I thought he would blast me since the hotel was a 5-star place. He just looked at me, smiled and said, "That's why I like to hire lazy people. They think of ways to finish work faster." I have an example of how the truly lazy will sabotage tracking so no one knows stuff is broken. There was this guy at a software company that does integrated software systems. He hated his boss at his job and apparently most of his team. Every time he was assigned a bug to fix, he would mark it resolved and assign it a no-reply email address associated with the team. The odd thing that I don't understand is how he managed to keep issues from getting escalated to other real people. At any rate, no one caught on. When he found a new job and a couple of people on his team took him out for drinks, he said, "You should look back into all the bugs I fixed. I never did any of that." So the guys who took him out for drinks went back and audited his work and were like, "Holy F! Not only did he do nothing, he hid identified issues for like a year." Must have been an EA Games dev. Was tiling a bathroom floor. One young guy I was working with was cleaning up when we were done. I told him to take the leftover tile downstairs to the truck, and then went back to cleaning what I was doing. 10 seconds later, I hear this huge crash and then a soft, "Oh, right." He had gone out onto the balcony and dropped them down into the truck, shattering over $100 worth of tile. He said he thought it would be faster. He wasn't wrong. I'm in corporate accounting, and I'm the only one in my department with a CPA. Of course, I have to take continuing education for my license, and I usually take as many hours of Excel courses as I can each year. By learning the keyboard shortcuts, advanced formulas, and a bunch of useful hidden features in Excel, I'm able to get most of my work done in less than 2 hours, then spend the rest of the day browsing Reddit and watching YouTube videos. Thank goodness our cubicle walls are high, or I'm sure they would have fired me by now for being on my phone 6+ hours a day. I look back at my time in corporate accounting and often realize just how much effing around I did at work, with literally no consequence. Other than month-end close, I feel like I sat on Reddit a solid 4+ hours a day. If I had improved my Excel to the point of knowing how to write macros, I would have been on 7/8 of the day. It made a lot of sense why the company I worked for decided to push for job documentation for 2 years, and then outsourced the work to offshore accountants. Sometimes I wish I was still in that job, and some days I'm very, very happy that I changed careers. There's a story that I've heard a few dozen times about a toothpaste company that had accidentally sent out cases of their product that had a few empty single boxes of toothpaste. The company had endeavored not only to rectify their mistake, but to ensure they did not repeat it. They hired an engineering company that designed a scale and an alarm shutdown system. If an empty carton was passed down the production line, klaxons would be triggered and a full stop would initiate until the offending box was recovered and an all clear had been entered into the computer system before production could resume. The company paid through the nose, but was ultimately pleased with their failsafe, and the engineers patted each other on the back. A few months pass and the engineers returned for quality control. The toothpaste company reported zero margin of error for weeks. Turns out, one of the minimum wage hairnet types on the assembly line didn't appreciate the sound of klaxons or working with the computers, so he or she had aimed a large fan at the production line before the scale that blew the lighter, empty cartons off the conveyor belt. Problem solved. Amazing. By teeing off the regular workforce with annoying alarms, the engineers motivated the factory workers to solve the problem themselves, after several thousand in R&D into the scale system. During my internship, my professor gave me line graphs on paper and asked me to find the coordinates by drawing horizontal and vertical lines. It would have taken hours, if not days. I thought to myself, I couldn't be the first one who is lazy AF. So I googled it, found this cool free-to-use software, Web Digitizer. Step 1. Scan the graph. Step 2. Mark the X and Y axes in the picture. Step 3. Grab a beer because you've got the nicest mother-flipping graph you couldn't have drawn yourself in a million years. My professor was so happy, she asked me to document the method and mail it across the entire department. Yes, I did share my original method with my professor and the entire department. 1, she was a really supportive professor, and I wanted to return her favors, even if the software might have been the tiniest help to her work. 2, the original developer of the software made it available online for free. He could have made it a paid service, and believe me, researchers would have paid because it is that good. But he kept it free for all of us to use, and it was my responsibility to share his work as much as I could. Got hired into a plant that just got a new big job building stuff for the military. My job was Materials Associate, which basically meant I drove a forklift and staged parts that were built. The engineers came up with a floor plan for all the parts and where they needed to be staged. They used fancy lasers and measuring devices and built it all in CAD. After telling them it wouldn't work, they said, "Well, let's see you do a better job." I organized the 50,000 square foot warehouse so that each part was close to the machines that used them. It followed the first in, first out method, and each department knew where their parts went when they were done making them, by putting up signs and whatnot. After that, my job was basically pointless because the warehouse ran itself. I decided to teach myself how to use the welding robots in my downtime. Fast forward 3 years and now I'm an automation engineer at one of the largest parts suppliers in the industry. P.S. Robots are very easy to learn and operate if you're struggling to find what you want to do in your career. Places are hiring with minimal experience too because there is a lack of people in the automation field. Get a 1-year college certification in mechatronics and you can make around $40,000 to $60,000 starting, depending on location. Back when I was a cashier at Borders, we had to keep a certain percentage of Borders rewards transactions. I was good at my job and was able to get into the high 80s, low 90s every month by being a good salesman and convincing them to get it. There was another guy I worked with that had an insanely high percentage, and I didn't understand how he did it. We later came to find out that he would just swipe a card and put it into people's bags without saying anything about it. He got caught and was given a warning and put on probation instead of being fired for cheating. Fast forward about a month and I find out he's getting promoted to work on the floor with all the movies and stuff. I could not believe they promoted him after all that stuff and looked me over. Someone that was actually a hard worker that did a really good job and often would have people compliment me to my managers. Then again, the management there was crap. I eventually got fired from there because the guy covering for me while I was on vacation got fired, and they somehow expected me to know and come in. In high school, we do 4 book reports every year. A friend of mine did his on each Lord of the Rings book and The Hobbit freshman year, and turned in the same 4 book reports for the rest of his time in high school. You switched English teachers every year, so nobody ever caught on. I was never brave enough to try the same thing. I once ordered a painter to paint my bathroom walls. His price was pretty extortionate for the small job, and he only had a relatively small brush to complete it. It was a pretty lousy paint job because of the small brush, so a few weeks later I finally convinced myself to get another painter, but just a cheap one to go over the bad job done by this other guy. Instead of using just a brush, he had a huge roller, and consequentially got the job done much quicker. He did a great job and charged significantly less than the other guy. Lee from Lee's Painting, wherever you are, thanks. I was once on a US military ship having breakfast in the wardroom, the officer's lounge, when the operations officer, OPS, walks in. This guy was the definition of not a morning person. He's still half asleep, bleary-eyed, basically a zombie with a bagel. He sits down across from me to eat his bagel and is just barely conscious. My back is on the outboard side of the ship, and the morning sun is blazing in on one of the portholes, putting a big, bright circle of light right on his barely conscious face. He's squinting and chewing and basically just remembering how to be alive for today. It's painful to watch. But then zombie OPS stops chewing, slowly picks up the phone, and dials the bridge. In his well-known, "I'm still totally asleep" voice, he says, "Hey, it's OPS. Could you shift our bar pat? Yeah. 165. Thanks." And puts the phone down, and then he just sits there, squinting, waiting. And then, ever so slowly, I realize that big blazing spot of sun has begun to slide off the zombie's face onto the wall behind him. After a moment, it clears his face and he blinks slowly a few times, and the brilliant beauty of what I've witnessed begins to overwhelm me. By ordering the bridge to adjust the ship's back and forth patrol by about 15 degrees, he's changed our course just enough to reposition the sun off his face. He's literally just redirected thousands of tons of steel and hundreds of people so that he could get the sun out of his eyes while he eats his bagel. I am in awe. He slowly picks up his bagel, and for a moment I'm terrified at the thought that his own genius may escape him, that he may never appreciate the epic brilliance of his laziness, since he's not going to wake up for another hour. But between his next bites, he pauses, looks at me, and gives me the faintest sly grin before returning to gnaw slowly on his zombie bagel. In high school, I had an absolute butthole of a teacher. He gave me a binder that had the name, address, phone of every student in the entire district, including the names of all their siblings. I was to type this in even though it was already printed out. I asked if it was already printed, why was I typing it? He said they paid an outside firm a bunch of money to do it, but the state pulled the funding and the firm refused to provide the files. And now the district didn't have the money to do it again, but they still needed the data. I was super teed off about how tedious of a job I was given, and complained to no end. He knew that I was the winner of a typing contest and agreed that this one project would be my entire grade for the semester. If I could manage to get it all entered into the computer by the end of the year, I'd get a passing grade. If not, I'd fail. After about 2 hours of data entry, I decided it was a bullcrap job and downloaded OCR software, scanned the whole thing in, and spent a day or two correcting scanning mistakes. My plan was to spend the rest of the semester goofing off and pretending to work. That lasted about a week before the teacher caught on. He then proceeded to start giving me more stupid, tedious work and said the previous deal was now off. I found out that part of the reason the deal with the consulting firm ended badly was his fault, and told him I was going to the school board with this information. We decided on a new plan. My grade for the semester would pass as an A, but I had free time to take on other classes the teacher offered. I used this free time to complete 1.5 other courses. In conclusion, my laziness got me 2.5 course credits in the span of time that I would have only gotten 1. Students. What's your, well, that happened moment in the classroom? At my school, we sometimes have dogs come and check the lockers for illicit substances. They always announce it like, "Teachers, please do not let students leave the classroom for the next bit of time." Everyone knows what it means, and one kid in my class grabbed his bag and jumped over 3 desks and ran out of the classroom. Turns out he was an entrepreneur of sorts. A physics class in community college. Professor was explaining conservation of angular momentum and had a kid sit on a tall chair that spins. He then had the kid hold 2 books out with extended arms and then spin as fast as he can before telling the kid to pull the books in close to his chest. Think of a figure skater and how they spin really fast. The kid immediately turns into a blur and the stool/chair starts to tip slightly until it rockets from under him like it was shot from a slingshot. The kid slams into the floor as if he got choke-slammed, and his head hit the floor in a way that sounded like someone dropped an overly ripe melon. The look on the professor's face said, "Well, that was a good run. Guess I have to find a new career now." Kid turned out okay, and everyone got a laugh, but it genuinely looked like I just witnessed a death. This wasn't my class, but it was the talk of the school for a while. A well-liked teacher gave her class a free workday and offered to play some music. Upon opening her iTunes, she found a file named Transformers MP4. Curious, she opened it. It turned out to be a hardcore adult flick that blasted through the entire class at full volume. Panicking, she couldn't figure out how to shut it off, so she ran the laptop, open and still blasting at full volume, down the hallway to the office to reduce exposure to students. It turns out the superintendent's son used one of the shared servers to browse and download the video, so it was accessible by every computer connected to the school network. The superintendent resigned a couple of years later. In high school physics, we were waiting for the teacher to show up, and another physics teacher from another class comes in with a bowling ball and says, "Do you guys think I can dribble this?" Everyone just looks at him incredulously, and he begins to repeatedly and heavily strong-arm the bowling ball onto the floor hard enough for it to rebound high enough that he can keep the momentum going. People start to laugh, but after about 5 or 6 bounces, the ball splits in half as it hits the floor. He quickly scoops up the halves, holds a conspiratorial finger to his lips, and shuffles out the door. About 15 seconds later, our physics teacher comes in, looks at the few dusty chips of bowling ball on the floor, and asks, "What was all that noise? What's this mess on the floor?" A kid fell out of the restroom ceiling and broke the whole ceiling, and in a different classroom, someone got thrown across the room into a wall. Guy with anger issues started yelling at the teacher and then slapped her across the face. Keep in mind this fat kid was huge, and the teacher was this old, tiny Asian woman. The nicest guy in the class smokes the guy with a sucker right hand and just puts the guy out cold. When my teacher brought his samurai sword and started yelling random samurai cries while trying to teach us about ancient Japan. Quite the period we had that day. When I fell asleep in the first row, and the professor and the other students started clapping to wake me up, and when I woke up, I also started clapping like a moron. 2 things you need to know. First, there was this guy at my school whom I've now known for 25 years. His thing is to scream, "Frick yeah!" at everything. He's done it since I've known him. In case it wasn't obvious, frick is a YouTube-friendly term for what he actually said. Anytime someone mentions Matt, someone always adds a "Frick yeah!" He is huge and very loud. When he comes in the bar, he announces his presence with an exuberant "Frick yeah!" If he calls you, you say hello and he yells "Frick yeah!" You get the picture. Second, my senior year. It was a thing to sneak vodka into the school in Cinnabon mugs. For some inexplicable reason, plastic Cinnabon mugs were like a huge thing. Sashaying around flaunting your Cinnabon mug. Rolls eyes. Anyway, I'm in post-lunch class one day and one of the Cinnabon vodka girls ups and starts puking bright hot pink, fruity vomit out the window behind her. Then she stood up and screamed, "Woo! Frick yeah!" at the top of her lungs with her face covered in puke. Frick yeah dude is also in this class, so he immediately screams, "Frick yeah!" back. Then she yells, "Frick yeah!" and they go back and forth yelling, "Frick yeah! Frick yeah!" getting progressively louder with each one until the teacher gets her and ushers her out of the room. The rest of us just sat there like, WTF was that all about? This happened like 2 to 3 semesters ago at my college. I was in finance class about 10 minutes from it ending. It was around 2:30, and I had to work at 4:30. Planned on hitting the gym between. Typical day, was getting ready to go by drinking my pre-workout in the last 10 minutes of class. Well, it turns out someone had a different plan. We get an email that the school is in a legitimate lockdown. There is a questionable man on campus with a tactical vest and large backpack walking around campus. Oh boy. So here's the reactions to this information. 50% of the class immediately panics. No idea what to do, huddles in the corner texting their loved ones, one chick bawling her eyes out, making all the noise, puked in the corner. Sick. Foreign exchange student whips out his laptop and starts a League of Legends game, getting visibly agitated at the back of the room. Frickin' Yasuo, am I right? Teacher breaks a piece of metal off the vent and stands by the door prepared to what looks like kill Julius Caesar. Professor in the adjacent room, connecting door, walks in and explains that we should all calm down because worst case scenario is we die and we get a cool plaque with our name on it in the hallway. This does not help the students already having anxiety, may I note. I'm over here, phone dying, absolutely yeeted to crap on pre-workout, with the inability to expend this energy. Wondering if I'll get fired for a no-call, no-show and feeling 99% peed off rather than scared. Look to the left out the window, SWAT team on the roof.jpg. Had this sketchy man come into our room. I'm of the utmost confidence that he would have walked away without harming a single human, simply because it was apparent that God left this classroom a long time ago, and we were in more hysteria alive than dead. Anyways, 2.5 hours later, I'm able to call my boss after we were allowed to leave and tell him that the kid who got reported as simply a student going to class and had a big backpack. There was no vest. The kid who reported him had already gotten into trouble for trying to start a racial conflict a week prior and had just had an agenda to push. The amount of pissed I was immeasurable. In a full auditorium, a random guy from a higher year entered. He yelled, "Ladies, this one's for you," and then proceeded to take off his shirt and trousers, his boxers still on, luckily. He then flexed his biceps and did different poses in front of hundreds of students sitting there, not knowing how to react. He then left saying, "Sorry to bother you," to the lecturer. Oh well. Apparently he bet with his friends to do this for 3 troughs of strong beer. Alright, I'm going to tell the listeners what I told the university board. I was peer pressured and I was the victim. Go into the bathroom and open the door. The professor is there, pooping. We make eye contact and I freeze. He slowly reaches for handle to close the door. So naturally, I shake his hand because I'm the world's biggest dum-dum. Not a student anymore, but we had a supply English teacher that had the good old habit of liking a little drink in the classroom. He used to pull a small bottle of vodka out of the drawer and take a small sip every few minutes while trying to be sly about it. Well, after a while, one of the students told a teacher about it, and then the supply teacher was found on his lunch break watching Netflix and drinking a glass of wine in the classroom. Funny thing is, he stayed on as a teacher for another 3 months before being totally kicked out for a similar thing. 9th grade, for reference. Everyone was being super loud, so we were pretty much unable to discern anything short of our own table. Just as the teacher is coming in and everyone is quieting down, this one kid just loudly talking and telling this one girl, who looks really effing uncomfortable, "It's 4 inches," with the most proud voice ever. "Some of the guys in my school were bullcrapping loudly before class, and one of them said pretty loudly, 'Yeah, mine's huge, effing gigantic, like 6 inches of man meat.' The guy he was talking to just kind of gave him a funny look and one said, 'Dude, 6 inches is like average.' Saw a kid die on the inside that day. You know it's bad when you exaggerate and your exaggeration isn't really impressive." I took business English my senior year of high school. We had to do a presentation on a made-up business. 2 kids did a presentation on a frozen yogurt place that was like make-your-own-yogurt thing. You would squeeze the flavors and stuff out of fake cow udders. Straight from the teat was the name of the business. It was a long day. Gentlemen, I'm interested in franchising. Freshman year of college, I had one professor who would randomly call on students in class, and if they didn't answer correctly, he would proceed to give them a roast in front of the whole class for their lack of knowledge on the subject material. I was in the class with a few of my good friends, as it was a prerequisite that we all needed to have. Even though we got our fair share of roasting from him as well, we all thought it was funny, and knew it was his way of making sure the students are engaged in the lecture. About halfway through the semester, he called on one person, and after she incorrectly answered, he started to casually roast this student. At this point, another girl raised her hand to get the professor's attention. After he called on her, she proceeded to vocally berate him about how he was treating us all like children, as well as call him every vulgar word she could think of. At this point, he's shouting back at her too, complete with all the same vulgarities that she used on him, and me and my friends are just sitting in the back, laughing under our breath while simultaneously being completely dumbfounded that this kind of stuff actually happens in college. Finally, he yells at her to leave lecture. She obliges, and as soon as she is out of the room, he proceeds to roast her even more to the class. It was so odd to see something like this, especially since I had just come from high school a few months before. Man, college is wild. Ex-student here. This was a long time ago. We sent whispers around the classroom to all drop our books on the ground, pretending it was by accident when the clock on the wall hit an exact time. When it happened, our teacher was in the middle of writing on the chalkboard, and she turned around, shocked, to find us all picking up our books. She cried after that, and we all started to feel really bad. Learned later that she had just had a miscarriage and was just trying to get through her day and not think about it. We broke through that face she was putting on by accident. Sorry, Teach. We didn't know you, and we all liked you. I'm sorry for the emotional whiplash there, folks, but since I found this story, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it while writing this particular episode. So there it is. I went to a small college and our classroom sizes were very small, 15 to 25 people, so we got to know everyone pretty well. There was this one guy who came in so high that he fell off his chair. Thankfully, the professor was relatively chill, so she let him go home. Not my story, but my friend told me how on the first day of class, during introductions and icebreakers, this girl got up and ran toward the door. She didn't make it and threw up all over the place, looked around her, and completely horrified, left the class. She came back for her stuff later. I have the same reaction to icebreakers. Tell us one fun fact about yourself. Also, another time, my professor knew I was turning 21 the night before, and when I came in the next morning, completely hungover and dead, he and the whole class applauded me. It was nice. Back in 8th grade middle school, we had this really cool and chill US history teacher. He never raised his voice and was pretty laid back about class and work. He taught in a storytelling kind of manner, and I don't even remember annotating any document in his class. Well, we had that one kid. In this story, I'm going to call him Jim. Jim was always late to class and never turned stuff in. He was that one really cringy kid that everyone either hated or pitied. My teacher never really got fed up with him and would always show his distaste for him in his facial expressions. My teacher normally would pull him aside to talk to him about his tardiness or missing assignments. Jim would say he would be earlier/do the assignments, but he never did. One day, Jim walks in late again. My teacher is about to start teaching, and then he turns and sees Jim walking in. Well, this time, my teacher wasn't so happy about it. It was the middle of the school year toward the end, and my teacher must have gotten so fed up with Jim at that point. My teacher yells Jim's name at the top of his lungs. He normally had a boomy voice, but when he yelled, it amplified 100 times over. The ground literally shook when he yelled, and I'm sure they could hear him downstairs at the other end of the school. Our school wasn't that small either. For the rest of the class period, about 30 minutes, literally it was dead silent. Everyone was still kind of shocked from it. Someone asked, "Meth, can I cook it?" in chemistry. Another person asked our math teacher who was going home to Canada over break if she could threaten to kill his mum who lives there. Same person told the same teacher that he couldn't do the work because he has 100 extra chromosomes. He doesn't. She responded by saying, "That explains why you look like that." As somebody who seems to just have a really strong idiot magnet located within their person, I sympathize heavily with these teachers and their rotating clown show of students. I remember being maybe in second grade and this one kid in our class kept yelling trash through the window at some 10th to 11th grader that was standing outside our windows. Our window was easy to climb in and out as it wasn't placed at a high level from the ground. Dude that was standing outside got annoyed with him, I guess, and just jumped on the windowsill, which was pretty wide, and said something along the lines of, "You kids should not be saying things like this. I'm older and won't do anything, but someone in this life will at some point if you keep this behavior." Then went back to his friends or whatever like nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Our whole class of second graders was shocked. I know it would have been more interesting if I remembered the details, but it happened a long time ago. Okay, so this happened a while ago, so I might not have all the details. So I was on the school bus and we weren't allowed to eat on the bus. So the kids behind me were talking about lunch tomorrow and one of them said, "Yeah, I can bring bacon." I was hungry, so I said, "Bacon? Who's bringing bacon?" The bus driver overheard me, but didn't know it was me, stopped the bus and yelled, "Bacon? Who has bacon?" Then he walked down the aisle and looked to see who had the bacon. It was so funny, but you kind of had to be there. First day of school, freshman year in woodshop. Teacher just finishes showing us a safety video on proper use of how to use a table saw. Then he was about to give a demonstration and said, "Now, you're going to see me do things a little differently than how you just saw it being done in the video you just watched. But that's just because I'm a professional, and I have been doing this for over 30 years. Teacher then proceeded to immediately cut off 3 of his fingers with the saw at the front of the classroom. Blood was spraying everywhere. He was screaming, holding his hand. Guys I was with in the back of the class started laughing, thinking it was a prank. Girl in the front of the class projectile vomited. A few of us helped him and his fingers on the floor and went and got the nurse. Someone called an ambulance. They were able to reattach them at the hospital. Wood class was cancelled for the rest of the year, and we all took some home economics in its place. This was an amazing Reads username, totally made up story? Damn it! When I was in college, I was sitting in a geology lecture center when someone dressed in a banana costume crashes in, does a lap around the room, then gets chased out of the room by a guy in a gorilla suit who came in after him. Was in a math class when a random student fell into the classroom and simply yelled, "You pushed me too hard, shifthead." He got up and left as if nothing really happened. The class laughed their butts off, including my math teacher. That's something I only see in cartoons. In high school, this big-sized metalhead was always late for the first class period of the day because he was hanging out in the hallway with his girlfriend for too long and never gave himself enough time to walk to the classroom. My teacher was a real laid-back kind of guy and had a flowing sort of teaching style. He really didn't mind, but one day he got annoyed because he knew the reason. He told the dude that he could say goodbye to his girlfriend a few minutes earlier and get to class on time. There was a little back and forth as this metalhead attempted to bluff and lie his way into some type of excuse. The teacher wasn't having it and said that he had to come to class on time once. He said, "You have to do it once. If you don't get to this class on time tomorrow, you're going to have to stay after school for detention." There was back and forth as this metalhead attempted to determine the seriousness of this threat. It seemed pretty serious. The teacher said he'd make the kid help clean the classroom. The next morning, we're all in there, the bell rings, and the teacher opens his mouth to speak. Suddenly from the hallway is the thunderous sound of someone wearing heavy boots running down it toward the room. Accompanying this is a deep-throated scream. "No!" The teacher looks at the class in shock as the door flies open and there is one last thunderous clap from a boot being stomped as the metalhead enters the room. Out of breath, this kid casually walks to his seat and says in his deep raspy voice, "I don't know what they're screaming about out there." I doubt that anyone else in the school could have yelled like that. There was a guy who sat in the front row of one of my classes when I was in community college. He would just bring fresh vegetables and just eat like a squash and cauliflower raw during class. Oh, persistent loud lecture eaters, how I haven't missed you, or the universal strong body odors your community of public munchers seems to share. 2 girls in a fight. One of them German suplexed the other into a table. I know that sounds like wrestling, but my teacher in 8th grade had an old wooden table next to her desk to hold extra books and stuff. Girls fought over a dude, I think, and after the slapping and hair pulling, it happened. This is in a college lecture hall, but with not too many students. During class, we heard female moans. At first, we each thought that they were hearing things, so nobody responded. 5 minutes later, the moans got even louder, and we turned around to the source. We thought it was probably someone watching an adult movie who accidentally forgot to plug their headphones in. The dude was 1 hand deep into the girl sitting next to him. Her short skirt was hiked up. I was sitting in my physics class trying to stay awake because that class is one of the first classes of the day, and I didn't get much sleep the night before. I sit at a table in the back of the class by myself. The table to my left has 2 of my friends and 1 other student sitting at it. I forget exactly what was being taught that day, but I remember my friends suddenly saying things like, "Oh my god, are you alright? And maybe you should go to the nurse." I looked over to see my friends grabbing tissues and giving them to the other student whose nose was bleeding, which wouldn't be such a problem if there wasn't so much blood pouring out from this guy's nose. It was concerning, to say the least. Our teacher told him to go and see the nurse. He nodded, stood up, and then heeled out the room. It was probably the weirdest thing I have seen in a while. What's the smallest amount of power you've seen someone abuse? Worked for a small computer repair company, 4 people total. The boss, 2 grease monkeys, we did all the small stuff like reformats and virus removal, and the secretary. It was awesome. I loved that job. The boss and my coworker were super chill and helpful. But the secretary, we'll call her Lorelei, was a different story. When I started working, I got a text from an old friend of mine warning me about her. Apparently, I had been hired because he had just been fired because of her. Okay, I thought, but she was great, very helpful and nice. She'd bring us Starbucks once in a while and other little niceties. Maybe my old friend had been the problem. Anyway, life was great. The months passed and things started to change. The nice secretary came out one day and told us she was no longer a secretary, but the office manager, and berated us any time we didn't call her the office manager. It was strange, but whatever. A little while later, I got called into the boss's office where she is standing right next to him, like Iago perched on Jafar's shoulder. She tells me my work priorities have been shifted. I was no longer allowed to work on any computer that came into the shop or go out on service calls. Instead, she said, I was to monitor and report on our customers' server activity. Okay, I guess this must be important. For the next week, I'm confined to my desk and printed out small batches of computer jargon that made very little sense and took less than an hour to do. When I asked what else I should do, she would intervene before my boss responded and tell me to try and improve the reports, whatever that meant. The next Monday, she calls me into the office again and says I'm on work probation. I have 3 weeks to be more productive or I'll be fired. Apparently, I wasn't doing enough to earn a paycheck. I did my best to make the reports as readable as possible, and when no one was looking, I'd finish up clients' computers that were on the workbench. Simple stuff like clicking next after a virus scan, until she caught me and reprimanded me for half an hour about how I don't have permission to do anything outside my job description. I gave up, sad to admit. I could see the writing on the wall. I spent the last week goofing off on my computer until the next Monday. I get called into the office. There's the boss I once respected, sitting like a beaten dog, and Lorelei, sitting like a queen in her place. She tells me I haven't improved my performance, and they're sorry, but here's my last check. Goodbye. I turn to my boss and look him square in the eye and ask him if he really agreed with it. He slumps his shoulders and said, kinda. I went home and texted that old friend asking him what happened when he got fired. He told me pretty much the same story I just went through. Later on, I hear they hired some other kid to take my place. Same thing ends up happening to him. Jeez. Sorry for the novel, I don't talk about this very much. I guess it feels good to let it out. As a closer, she eventually got fired after trying to get rid of the best tech guy they had, my coworker/superior. I think my old boss finally grew a spine. She ended up leaving her husband and 2 daughters for another woman who eventually left her. No idea where she is now, don't care. Maybe it's just me, but when someone in a non-military setting insists that I call them by their job title, it immediately makes it 10 times harder to take them seriously. I had a coworker who cheated when she played games with 3-year-olds. When the kids called her out on it, she would deny it and say that she was a teacher and whatever she did was allowed in the game. Her entire self-esteem seemed to be dependent on winning games designed for preschoolers. When people used to quit at my old company, I'd let them click the mouse button to deactivate their AD account on the last day. Everyone loved it because it was a single act that meant closure. A teacher in high school tried to send me to the office for having an electronic device out in the hallway. The device was medical equipment, and after I explained that to him, he told me he didn't care because I'd still broken a school rule. Needless to say, I didn't get in trouble. For a bit of context, this all took place before school even started, and there were plenty of kids waiting in the halls for class to start. I'm diabetic, so I was using my insulin pump when this teacher walked past. I didn't end up going to the office because my awesome broadcasting teacher heard the other teacher shouting in the hallway and came out to see what was going on. I did a lot of work for my broadcasting teacher before and after school, so he knew me pretty well. He didn't even wait to find out what was going on before he told the guy to stop shouting and to leave me alone. And since the butthole teacher only picked on students, he left without another word, no repercussions. I worked at a small retail store with a manager, an assistant manager, and me, the employee. The manager loved me. The assistant manager loved me some days and hated me others. One day, when the assistant manager was in a particularly hateful mood, she threatened to recommend the manager that I be fired. I said, "Why? The manager loves me and I'm a good, reliable worker. She would never fire me." And she said, "Yeah, I know she wouldn't, but as assistant manager, I have the power to recommend you get fired." My high school did an end-of-year celebration on campus during school time. It was just the graduating year and the year below us, so it wasn't that disruptive. But to prevent it getting out of control, the school hired 4 security guards. One of them decided to lock all gates at the end of the day. We couldn't leave unless we exited through the office. I'd say there were around 700 students, and he just refused to let us leave, until another security guard had to fight through the crowd to let him know he was just being a jerk. He unlocked the gate I was at, and then unlocked the others. When I did safety patrol in elementary school, we gave out "good job" tickets to younger kids if they made good choices in the hallway. My best friend from my neighborhood was a grade below me, so every day I would give him a good job card so his mum would let him come outside and play. He's the only person I ever gave good job cards to. My kids were quite little, and I was giving them turns each day of being in charge of cleaning the living room to exercise leadership skills. When it was my son's turn, I had left them alone for a while and came back to the girls complaining that he was ordering them to punch each other. In elementary school, I had this one teacher who, when she would have to leave the classroom, she'd pick a random kid to stand at the chalkboard and watch the class. No one was allowed to talk or get up until the teacher came back. To be honest, my class was pretty rowdy, and given the chance, we could get really loud, which is why the teacher didn't want us talking if she was gone. If you talked or got up, your name went on the board and you'd lose 5 minutes of recess. Then, tally marks would be added if you talked or got up again, and you'd lose an additional 5 minutes. And if you got enough, you'd start losing time on the next day's recess. One day, she picked this one kid. We'll call him Cole. Cole gets up there and he's slowly looking back and forth between each of us, and if he thought someone was going to talk, he'd put their name on the board. They didn't have to do anything, and he'd put their name on the board and cost them 5 minutes of recess. He then offered those with their names on the board that he'd take their names off before the teacher got back if they held their breath until he said they could breathe. Oh boy, in my freshman year of college, we had a group project, and of course we have someone who decides to elect themselves as a leader. Okay, cool, no issues. You don't know how to code, but we can teach you. But he didn't want to. He wanted to delegate and then sit on his butt. So the 3 of us coded this flight management program while he organized meetings and set deadlines for us. He raged when we didn't finish said tasks within the time limit and went off on ridiculous rants. The kicker was that we had to include our names as comments on which part of the code we did and got graded on that. We continuously bugged him to learn just a bit to at least create the front interface or the help section, but he straight up refused. Since he didn't write a single piece of code, he ended up getting a 0 in the project. He started blaming us for not putting his name on the code and went and complained to the professor. The professor laughed in his face after he heard our story. This was a CS class. I feel like everyone has met this person in university at some point, no matter their field of study. I think most of them end up in middle management later in life. When I was first starting my job, there was this prick who worked in the office who told me he was a supervisor. He would order me around and give me extra work on top of the work I'm trying to do, and give me crap later for not having it all done. He'd make me do unsafe stuff and work in areas I hadn't been officially trained in. Someone let it slip that he's just an office clerk and not a supervisor, so the next time he walked up to give me extra work, I told him to get a real supervisor to okay it, and he paused, looked at me, took the paperwork back, and went back to the office. Didn't see him for the rest of that day. In my AP government class in high school, we had a 2-week mock congress, and they each had to propose a bill to our mock subcommittee. I was named chairman of the subcommittee. One of the leaders of the Republicans, Danny, shared the same first period with me. Our first period was really strict about being late, but if someone in the class said that you showed up and went to the bathroom, she would not mark you late. So the first thing I did was make an alliance with Danny. He covered for my lateness and I pushed his bill through the subcommittee. And we learned about real politics. Political corruption really is the gift that keeps on giving. I used to volunteer at the local library when I was in high school. Every year they had a book sale to help raise money for events. 25 cents for paperbacks and 50 cents for hardbacks. I was also working retail at this time, so I decided being cashier would be pretty appropriate. It was going pretty well. I kept the line moving and was used to the small talk of being at a register. The head librarian was busy organizing and she had one of the mum volunteers keep an eye on things. Not long after she started supervising, she came over to me and told me she didn't think it was a good idea for me to be on register. I was pretty confused by this. No one had complained, there was hardly ever a wait, there was no reason for her to think I wasn't capable. I told her it was fine, that I was used to this with my part-time job. She was still visibly uneasy and insisted I help with something else. It got to the point where she was practically demanding me to go somewhere else. Not wanting to cause a scene, I went to assist elsewhere. I found out later she thought the math of calculating the totals was too hard for children to be responsible for. Seriously, I was in AP Calc, and she didn't think that I could add 25 cents and 50 cents increments. The best part of it all was that my mum went to the book sale a few years after, and the same lady was on the register. She had a cheat sheet for adding up the book totals. I'm still bitter. For those wondering about the cheat sheet, it was a list of the 25-cent increments like this. 1 book, 25 cents. 2 books, 50 cents. 3 books, 75 cents, etc., etc. I had a babysitter lay out a bunch of rules, including words we couldn't say. Not bad words, mind you, but shoe was one of them, and I specifically remember being sent to my room without dinner for saying it. My brother ended up busting me out, and we locked her out of the house. Viva la révolution! I'm a receptionist at a very quiet office. To get in, visitors have to push a button that makes a loud sound inside the office. Then I see them on camera and unlock the door remotely. This girl comes every day, early in the morning, to check if there's anything to pick up. She works upstairs. She just pops her head in to see the empty box and leaves. But before this, she holds down the effing button, and the sound is horribly loud, jarring, and elongated unnecessarily. So I just sit here and stare at her on the camera for way longer than I need before buzzing her in. I'm a petty B-word. I don't think you're that much of a B-word. I think I would try playing a game with this person. I would not open the door for longer and longer increments and wait until she was just about to push the buzzer again and then open the door. Hold her up for the maximum amount of time possible every day. Maybe I'm a petty B-word too. A friend of my mum babysat us once. Major control freak. I tried to play with a small box of Legos in the living room, and she told me to clean it up because someone might step on them. So I pack up and go into my room and start playing. She yells at me from the living room that she can't see me, so I can't even be in my own freaking room. She's been sitting on her big butt the whole day, eating our Oreos and potato chips, so I say screw it and dump the box in the middle of the hallway and start building. She flips her lid and screams at me to pick them up. I tell her no. She calls my mum and yells that I'm being very rebellious and she needs to get home and rein in her horrible little son. I hate Sue. In elementary school, everyone had the chance to be a line leader on his or her birthday. One kid was kind of socially awkward, so on her day she decided to give someone else the title. Our teacher was pissed off because she felt disrespected by this mild change in line leadership. If you don't want to accept the title I generously gave to you, go to Mrs. P's classroom. I'm trying to be kind to you, but you're being a brat who thinks she has the right to decide who's in charge. Then she went off on the other girl for indecent behavior and harassment, even though she just kind of yelled at the awkward chick, but whatever. Maybe the birthday girl shouldn't have called someone else the line leader, but the teacher took personal offense for something so trivial. Worked at the concession stands at the beach one summer. Whenever responsibilities were given out of who was supposed to do what for that day, one of my co-workers would suck up to the supervisors, so they would give him the clipboard for him to decide who did what. Naturally, he never assigned himself anything. After handing out the jobs, he'd go and sit in the little office inside the stand and do nothing, while the rest of us worked. One time he assigned me the job of cleaning the boardwalk. I was to take a broom and dustpan and walk the entire length of the boardwalk looking for litter to sweep up. The idiot didn't know that the cleaning of the boardwalk wasn't the responsibility of us concession stand workers. That job belonged to the workers employed by the state. We concession stand workers were responsible for the cleanliness of only the small cement patio area directly in front of our stand, not the boardwalk too. I took advantage of his stupidity and I walked down the boardwalk long enough to be out of sight of my concession stand and sat down on a bench for a couple of hours or so, resting and relaxing while he was doing the same in the office. When working fast food, I was told to scrub the bathroom floors. It was already really clean, so it didn't take long. I went back up front, and before I could say anything, my supervisor sent me back to do a better job. Went back, locked the doors, and played on my phone for over half an hour. Later, I was told that the bathroom looked really great. Easiest hour of my time while working there. I was at a completely empty airport and only needed to identify myself before I could pick up my luggage. There was no queue, so I skipped the line. That butthole at the desk made me walk back and compelled me to zigzag all around the fences where nobody was standing. And afterwards, he and a colleague laughed at me because he knew he could use his power like that. At first, we obviously didn't go back because it was bullcrap. However, he refused to help us then, so we rolled our eyes and did it anyway, just to get it over with instead of making a fuss. It was a small foreign airport and authorities would not give a crap about complaining tourists. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the closest that small, petty airport attendant ever came to feeling joy. Anybody who is involved in running a homeowners association. Back when I lived with my parents, there was a woman on the HOA that lived across the street from us. Both houses were on the corner. She decided that there was too much traffic on the street in front of her house in the morning, so she decided to put up an official-looking sign stating that no one could turn right at the stop sign in front of her house from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. Mind you, people were turning right at that corner because there was an elementary school located on the street behind her house, and many people needed to drive there. But she didn't care, it was disrupting her, and she wasn't going to allow it. However, I also needed to turn there to get out of the neighborhood for work, so one night, a few days after she put up the sign, I stole it. She put it up again. I stole it again. She responded by selling her house. Justice was served. I have a good friend who is on the board of his association. He is also a trained mediator and a really good guy. The board is only 3 people, basically because no one else wants to put up with anyone else complaining. This position wears on him so bad. I don't think he has actually ever delivered a written delivery, which would be a violation or order, but simply talks to people. Oh, your yard isn't mowed because your wife has been in the hospital. No problem, get it done when you can, type of guy. His stress comes from the neighbors complaining and tattling on the people next door over the smallest stuff. I honestly feel bad for him many days. My dad actually got elected to the head of an HOA because he wanted to chill it out a bit. He would get really long letters from the previous HOA head, and they were just massive rants about how he needed to buckle down on these people that had next to nothing wrong with their yards, fences, or whatever tiny BS this guy deemed unacceptable. My dad just told him TS and to stop complaining about every little thing. It was me. I was working at the tax office. Someone called up. Their return was late, so they had a $100 fine. He also owed some tax. Not a lot, but enough. So he calls up and he's telling me about how he hadn't been working this year and things were tight, and I'm sat there filling in a form to put him on a payment plan. And then I realized this was a kid from school that had bullied me. So I told him it was TS and he had 30 days to pay before he added another fine. Then I closed the form and ended the call. Wanted to relocate with my cool little rabbit. Brought a ticket and confirmed with the airline beforehand. Ticket had a comment that said, authorized to travel with a rabbit in the cargo hold. Paid extra. On the day of my flight, after security checks, some lady who's the chief service officer, which basically was a 50-year-old flight attendant, said we're not flying. The rabbit will escape and chew electrical wiring and kill us all, apparently. Also, she had no superior and reported to no one. It took a lot of tears from my SO, lots of shouting from me, and 1 hour to get her to get special approval from the captain. I don't think I could ever take the little guy back now, stuck in Germany for a few more years. That lady made the day of starting a new life extremely traumatic. Frick you, Hannah, wherever you are. Security guard at a community college. This guy was the definition of a rent-a-cop. Big, fat, awkward, no gun, and a whistle that he was not the least bit shy about using. A girl I was hanging out with needed to go up there to turn in a form, and I went with her. We got there, and the parking lot was deserted. That's when we realized it was a holiday weekend, but since we had already driven up there, we went to see if the offices were open. Sure enough, the door to the administration building is unlocked, so we go in. After walking around for a bit, we realize that all the offices are closed, so we decide to cut our losses and head out. Suddenly, from the other end of the hall, we hear, "Freeze! Stop what you're doing right now!" It's the tub of crap security guard who comes down and starts screaming at us like a drill sergeant, demanding answers for why we're in the building, accusing us of breaking in and not letting us get a word in. Finally, I just cut him off and said, "Dude, we're enrolled students and the flipping door was unlocked. If you honestly think we're here to rob the place, call the real cops, but we're already on our way out." He then yelled a couple of things about this being our only warning, etc., as we walked away from him and left. What's your top, "holy crap, that worked" moment? A guy we'll call Bob left the company I was at. A year or two later, he started recruiting people from our company. I was interested, so I flew out for an interview. First 5 interviews went great. Seemed like a good group to work with. The final interview was with the HR director. It went okay, and then we got to the pay part. I said I wanted X amount. She said the average pay for my experience and position was X minus 20K. My response was, "Bob didn't fly me out here because I'm average." I have no idea why I said that, but I got the job and the pay I wanted. Months later, when we were getting drinks, Bob brought that up. Apparently, HR director thought I was very quiet and introverted from our interview, so my response caught her even more off guard than it caught me. Used an electric palm sander to clean the soap scum out of my tub. Put a sponge right on the bottom and turned that bad boy on. I thought my tub was just naturally eggshell colored. Nope, it's pure white. I once got fired from a job at the grocery store. I really needed money though, and no other place was hiring. So a week later, I just showed up and started doing my job as usual. No one said anything, and I got my pay at the end of the week like normal, and I stayed at that job until I quit a year later. A very confused patient was fighting me when I was trying to give him IV antibiotics. "You're gonna kill me! What's my family gonna do if you kill me?" he wailed while pointing at his adult son. "If I kill you, they can sue me and the hospital and be rich," I said. The man just kind of made an, "oh yeah," kind of mumble and let me hook him up to the IV. His son was trying so hard not to laugh. I had a test coming up and needless to say, I didn't want to take it. So 9-year-old me decides to jump out of a tree and fake being hurt. I didn't go to school for the next 2 days. I realize now that I could have just said I fell out of the tree. I didn't actually have to do it. My first edition PS3 stopped working in 2011. It would turn on, but it would never read a disc. About 6 months ago, I randomly found a video on YouTube with like 120 views that was basically a 12-year-old kid showing that if you lift the PS3 vertically when loading a disc, it'll start to read. I tried it and boom, that trick worked. I choose to believe that the child in this video was this commenter's personality from an alternate reality. The 12-year-old was him after he fixed the PS3 in 2011. To get out of an after-hours work event, I came up with the quickest thing I could think of and told my boss that my iguana was sick and I had to get to the pet store to pick up his medication before they closed. I don't have an iguana. The next day, I changed my desktop background to a photo of someone else's iguana. People kept asking me for weeks how my iguana was doing. Had the infamous red rings of death for an old Xbox 360 at one point. Called up a buddy. He told me to turn it off, hold it about 1.5 feet above the floor, and just drop it. I figured that I couldn't make it much worse, so I dropped it. Worked perfectly ever since. My first vehicle was a 1985 Dodge Ram that had about 300,000 miles on it. Needless to say, it wasn't exactly reliable. Anyway, my friend and I had tickets to go see a concert in a city that was about 3 hours away. We made it there just fine and had a blast at the concert. We couldn't afford to stay overnight, so we started on the long journey home. If all went well, we could get home around 3 a.m. There was one stretch of highway where there was 60-ish miles between towns. It's pretty much the worst place to break down on that journey. There were big signs warning travelers to fill up with gas before leaving town, but I had half a tank. My truck sputtered out and died almost halfway between the two towns. It sure sounded like I ran out of gas, but the gauge still showed half a tank. All had not gone well. So there we were, 1:45 a.m., stuck on the side of the highway in Texas, 30 miles from the nearest towns, no moonlight, and this was before teenagers had cell phones. We were screwed. After a bit of poking around with a flashlight, we discovered that we did have fuel, but the fuel pump had died. We decided to sleep in the truck and mess with it in the morning. The fuel pump was inside the engine instead of in the fuel tank, like a modern vehicle. It was powered by the engine instead of an electric motor. Essentially, the fuel pump would constantly pump gasoline when the engine was running, and gas would always be available for the carburetor float valve. The extra pumped gas would just go back into the gas tank. I was just drifting off to sleep when I got an idea. I worked for almost an hour in the pitch dark. I used the same extra hose from an agricultural fertilizer, a drink straw, screw clamps, and duct tape to rig the windshield fluid pump to pump fuel from the fuel line into the carburetor float line. I got in my truck, hit the windshield fluid lever, and the truck started right up. It took a bit of trial and error, but I was able to get the timing down where I knew how often to hit the lever to keep the truck running. We made it back home just after 4:30 a.m. My dad wasn't immediately amused with my handiwork, but he told all of his friends how clever his son was, so I guess it passed the dad test. Please tell me that you didn't keep that same pump in place after you got home. I'm willing to bet a device designed to squirt water isn't going to hold up for long against a more corrosive substance like petrol. Halloween party during college, and everyone is starting to pass out except this very inebriated girl who just won't shut up about wanting someone to turn off the light. I pulled the sleeping bag over her face and said, "Click." She said, "Thank you," and went to sleep. My friend and I looked at each other amazed that it actually worked. Had a laptop slide backward off my lap, hit the floor, and stop working. Showed me an error screen and wouldn't start back up. Decided to turn it over and drop it from the same height onto its opposite side. Why not? It's already broken, right? And it started working again. Have you tried dropping it off and on again? A buddy of mine once did this with his body and a dent in the side of the van, drunk. We asked him how the dent got there and he starts backing up and says, "Well, I was drunk and I stumbled pretty hard and slammed into the van, like this." Long story short, he recreated the drunken fall whilst drunk again and popped the dent right out of the van. As a hardware computer technician, I'm frickin' baffled. This is the kind of fail story we hear way too often. It got dropped twice. How did it get dropped twice? Well, I decided to turn it over and drop it from the same height onto its opposite side, hoping it would fix it. Palm through face. On the flip side, as the great Cade Six once said, everyone loves a bad idea when it works. I work on costumes in theaters in New York City. About 2 years ago, I was sitting in the front row of a show, and a button popped off one of the costumes. The next day, I took it back to the stage door with my resume, and a little note that said, "This came off one of the costumes yesterday, and I thought you might want it back. And while I have your attention, here is my resume." And that is the story of how I got my first job on a Broadway show. One time, a bird got caught in our chimney, and while me and my roommate discussed how to get it out, he suggested we stick our hand up there, and the bird will just land on our finger. I laughed at him and said it would never work. Within 30 seconds, he was walking to the door with a bird perched on his pointer finger. "Hi, narrator here. Is your flatmate Bernie Sanders or Snow White?" I was hiking with a friend, and a mountain lion/cougar/puma crossed our path about 30 yards ahead of us. My friend turned around and went, "Oh crap," and began to run, at which point the cat started running straight at me. I put my hands up in the air and yelled, "Blood!" and it stopped to a skid and ran in the other direction. I have a Verizon Center staff lanyard that a buddy gave to me from some concert 10 or 12 years ago. It literally says nothing but Verizon Center and staff. White letters on a black background, and then has a small barcode and some illegible gibberish on the other side. It could be entirely fake, as I've never seen anyone else use one like it. So far, 3 free concerts and 1 free NBA game. Half afraid to keep using it, especially since the arena changed its name. I can't get anyone else in with it, so while I can literally go anywhere, I have to do it alone, which is much less fun. I once showed up 8 hours late for work. My company was trying out this crazy 3-shift schedule and would change every day, but there was no order to the scheme. If you didn't check what the manager put out that day, no one knew when they should be at work the next day. So after a hard shift, I forgot to check that bad boy. And when I came in the next day expecting to arrive at the shift change, everyone was at their desks working away. Someone sees me and asks, "Hey, did you get moved to this shift?" I picked up a clipboard and said, "No, just here to, inspect." I spent about 10 minutes walking around the office just nodding or scribbling notes before I went home. Not only did I not work that day, one of the managers thought it was awesome that someone was checking up on projects. In college, I had one class where the professor was very disorganized. He was always losing crap and forgetting to grade stuff. It was a small class, so there were only 7 of us, and we decided to do an experiment. On the day of exam, we asked him if he had graded the exam already, and being the disorganized mess that he was, he said yes. So that day, we never took the exam, and a few weeks later, everyone received a 100. His explanation was that he couldn't find the exam papers, but was sure everyone studied hard and did a good job. By the way, we didn't scheme to get out of an exam, and as far as I know, everyone studied. We just thought to do it for laughs, but it ended up working out well. The time I avoided getting in trouble by being really boring. About 6 years ago, I was at my ex-girlfriend's house on a Sunday. Behind her house was a service center for city vehicles. So, since it was a government building, it was closed on Sundays. Behind the main building was a trail that you can walk down for a couple of minutes and get into a subdivision. So me and my ex decided to drive down the head of the trail behind the building and try out the mini bong I had recently purchased. So we pull up and I take the bong out, and I am holding it out the window, pouring a bit of water into it when I look in the mirror. There is a frickin' cop car 15 feet behind me flying up, and here I am dangling a bong out the window in front of them. I bring the bong back in and throw it under my seat and push a sweater on top of it. The cop car has now pulled up right behind me, and 2 cops are dashing up to the side of the car. "What's going on? You can't be back here. It's trespassing," said the cop on my side of the car. "Oh, hey officer, we were just, going geocaching." "What's that now?" "Geocaching, sir. Here, look." And I take my hiking GPS out of the dash and show it to him. I then go on a 10-minute long spiel about geocaching and what's it all about, and I am super dry about the whole thing. My speech ends and I'm looking at him and he just says, okay then, well, have a nice day." Should I leave, sir? You said this was trespassing after all." Don't worry about it." And both cops get in the car and left. No idea how that worked. It's good to know that if I ever get into trouble with the law, I might be able to get out of it this way. I'll just describe my editing process for this job. Some other comments to this post read, "The police fled for fear of being bored to death. Jeez, trespass or whatever, I don't care. Nerds." Moved offices at work. Tried admin/password on the new router login page. Who has 2 thumbs and higher bandwidth? This guy. In our dorms, the PCs in the rooms had throttled internet, but in the shared labs, they didn't. They told us this was only during certain evening times, but it was patently obvious it was round the clock. I went into the lab, got the Mac from one of the lab PCs, and gave it my Mac. I was on the lab subnet from then on and had much faster internet. I did this for a few friends and told some others about it. Applied for a job at a French fry factory. The online application asked, "What makes you want to work for us?" I simply put, "Potatoes are my favorite food." HR lady and engineering manager loved it. Been working there 10 months now. My friend applied to Bed Bath & Beyond. During the interview, they asked why she wanted to work there. Her response was, "I grasp the concept of beds and baths. It's the beyond that I'm most interested in." She was not hired. Anytime I brought a girl home from the bar in college, because my go-to move was just look around till a girl made eye contact and then nod. Whenever it worked, I was pretty amazed at the results with such a lack of effort. To clarify, it's a nod up, like you're saying, "Hey, what's up?" Also, it works well for any attractiveness, because it helps you understand what level or type of girls are into you, and you avoid the awkwardness of just trying to hit on random girls that may have no interest in you. Good luck to everyone trying to meet someone at a bar. It works surprisingly well. I got my current girlfriend by making eye contact with her across the room and pointing finger guns at her. Didn't know her at all. I'd also like to bring up that she loves my terrible puns, and that's actually how I sealed the deal the next day. Never stop following your dreams. In high school, I told a girl who was way out of my league, "So you should give me your number." She asked, "Why would I do that?" I said, "Because if I just dial randomly, it'll take forever to call you." Waited to be shot down, but she laughed and gave it to me. We were together for 7 years. My son was living nearby and had locked himself out of his room. He called me for help. During my many assignments in the military, I was once stationed with a guy who was also a locksmith, incessantly told me about locks, lockpicks, tumblers, etc. So I showed up at my son's apartment, armed with a basic knowledge about how locks work, and 2 paper clips. I half-straightened them out, used one to flick the tumblers, and the other to pull at the bottom of the lock to turn it. 2 minutes later, I was in. My son says, "Holy crap, you did it!" Got serious dad points for that one. I went to New York City for Fashion Week with the boutique I was working for. After the fashion show we attended, everyone wanted to go out clubbing. Me, being young and new, I didn't want to be the buzzkill. So I went with them even though I was only 18. Arriving at the first club, we were allowed to skip the line because we knew people, and we get to the bouncer. He's going one by one, checking everyone's IDs, and I'm sweating bullets. When he got to me, we just looked at each other. He goes, "ID." And I freeze, and for some reason I said, "Man, I already showed you mine." Until this day, I don't know if he was being nice or just didn't want to look stupid, but he let me in. Needless to say, I got hammered off $18 mixed drinks because F it, right? For about 10 years, I had a wart on the bottom of my foot. A really big, ugly, better not date a dude with a foot obsession kind of wart that was probably about 1.5 centimeters across. I'd tried pretty much everything to get rid of it, short of going for what I was told was the painful cryosurgery to get rid of it. When I'd eventually had enough of having a blob the size of a Volkswagen Beetle on my foot, I decided to book an appointment with my doctor to have it removed surgically. Then I read about duct tape occlusion therapy. The basic idea is you put a patch of duct tape, stick it over a wart, and wait. If the tape falls off, you put another piece on and, well, that's pretty much it. Bollocks, I thought. There's no way that'll do anything. But duct tape is cheap and I'm strongly averse to pain, so I figured, why not give it a try? A couple of weeks later, no verruca. It very much enjoys the pro-science, anti-alternative medicine side of me, but whether it's placebo or not, I can't deny that it worked. So now you can date dudes with a foot obsession. So this thread led me on a merry chase through the internet to check out duct tape occlusion theory and… And here I've been burning off mine with apple cider vinegar like an idiot. Rewind to my junior year of college, and everyone's packed into a living room and boozing heavily in preparation for Super Bowl 49. Literally 10 minutes before kickoff, a half-filled cup of milk gets spilled on top of the cable box, and the picture instantly cuts out. Insanity ensues. One quick-thinking individual, not me, decides to call the cable company and gets through to a customer service rep, and we explain the problem. She just says, "Oh, not a problem, sir. Just let me reset your cable box remotely from here." Within 30 seconds, the pregame turned right back on, and we didn't even miss kickoff. This witch remotely evaporated milk from a cable box. Why was there milk on the cable box if y'all were heavily boozing? Chicago, 2004. At a tech conference and been dancing with this amazingly hot woman at a bar near the event hotel we are all staying at. We get into the elevator after closing time with 8 other dudes, all of whom have been working to get time with her. I'm on the 4th floor of a 30-story hotel. She's somewhere in the high 20s. Door opens at my floor. I say, "This is me," as I'm in the back of the elevator with her. She says, "I'm really thirsty." And I immediately reply, "I have water in my room." Great, let's go. Married for 13 years now, together from that night forward. I woke up the next morning and we decided to spend the rest of our lives mornings together that day. She moved states 3 weeks later, and we wed 4 months after that. 2 kids and a very happy life followed that cheesy line. We have this maths course that's necessary for my major at school. I loathe math and might actually be a little number dyslexic. Dyscalculia for those interested. For this reason, I didn't take the course too seriously, And then, when I had to get my butt into gear, could not understand the end of the course material whatsoever. Fast forward to finals time, and I needed greater than 88% on the exam in this class to pass, and it wasn't going to happen, so I decided to study for my other exams and just retake the course. I decided to at least go to the exam and bullcrap it using Excel. Test was in a proctored lab and Excel was an allowed tool, as well as my limited math knowledge and whatever test-taking skills I had. Guessed on a majority of the questions, muttered the old YOLO, and hit submit. Frickin' 89%. Literally guessed my way to passing a class. May not be the grandest achievement, but I've never had pure laziness and apathy work out like that before. Just goes to show you kids, hard work is for the birds. Not me, but Buzz Aldrin repaired a jammed switch using a ball pen. On the moon. On a switch critical for their takeoff. Not me. Oh, really? I'm not buying it. I think he needs to prove that he isn't in fact Buzz Aldrin. What's your "what the frickin' frick is this" moment in your dating history? So I've known this guy for almost a year now. Not really good friends or anything, more casual acquaintances. We have a bunch of common friends and see each other from time to time, parties, etc. A couple of months ago, he started messaging me, first on Facebook, then by text. He got my number from a friend of mine, he didn't ask me for it. And most of the time I responded just to be polite. He's nice enough, but not really my type. So when we started dropping hints about meeting up, I just turned him down and said I'm busy or would just catch up next time there's a gathering with our friends. That sort of thing. Fast forward to last week and he asked me out again, which, if I recall correctly, is the 6th time in the past 2 months. I finally decided to at least give him a chance, cause hey, what could go wrong anyway? And who knows what I'm missing and all that jazz. Worst case scenario, it would be awkward, but we've talked more than a few times, so I was thinking it can't be that bad, and we could actually have a pleasant time. Date night comes, and we meet up in the city after work. We have dinner, nice, cutesy Japanese place, conversation was okay. I was certain at this point that it's really not going to take off, he really isn't my type, but I was having a pleasant enough time and he was a total gentleman and not bad to talk to. The bill comes, and I was going to suggest a quick coffee before heading home. However, he said that there's something he had made an appointment for us for, and we need to rush off and make it in time. I was a bit intrigued and excited. Was it a movie or a show, a play, as he knows I'm into theater? So we hurry off and he took me to a high-end luxury mall with an attached wing for offices. We went up, wait, this is an office lobby. What the? It was a frickin' weight loss center. So he explains that he's part of this company, he works for them part-time basis as a distributor, and he wanted to introduce me to their products, which would revolutionize my lifestyle and make me the healthiest I've been in my entire life. For your information, I'm 5'5" and 135 pounds. I was totally stunned at this point, so I was just nodding like an idiot the whole time we were walking inside. He then left me with his smarmy teammates, who proceeded to give me an orientation about their company and a run-through of their health supplements. When he got to the part where the weight loss products are, the smarmiest one said, "Ooh, now this is what you've been waiting for. I've saved the best for last." I just sat through it because I knew that if I started to say something, I was definitely going to burst and make a spectacle of myself. There was a seminar ongoing and we were at a little table to the side. After I flat out said that I'm not interested in any of the products and frankly don't believe that I need health supplements, I eat well and exercise regularly, they started on the second phase, introducing me to the business aspect of it. Basically, it was a networking model of business where you not only sell the products, you also recruit people to sell them, and they would be under your team, and you get a commission for every sale they make. They rhapsodized about the wonders of the product, how easy it is to sell, and how much money I could be making, because they could tell I have the right kind of personality and network for it. Registration was only $1,000, and it was consumable in products, which I could either use or sell to get my registration money back immediately. I wish I could say I flipped the effing table and screamed at them to F themselves with their health supplements and hope they overdose on their products. But no, right after the talk, I just said I should head home since it was getting a bit late. The guy actually messaged me to say that he had a good time and he hopes to see me again, and that I would consider their products and the business opportunity. I called up some friends and went out for drinks because F your health supplements, that's why. You know, I've been on some bad dates in my life, but none of them were join my pyramid scheme bad. I'll take my dates being into unexpected kinks any day, I suppose. When I was a teenager, I worked at a retail store in the mall, and a guy who worked a few stores down would always come in and talk to me. He was super sweet and genuine and would randomly take me to lunch or bring me coffee and the like. It was just nice to have someone to talk to and who seemed genuinely interested in me and what I had to say. He asked me on a date a few times, and I always declined. I don't like the idea of dating someone who I work with or work next to, just in case it goes sour. After a month or two, I finally agreed to go on a date with him, because good guys are hard to find. I couldn't just let him pass by. He picks me up at my house, and on our way to dinner, we get into a car accident. The driver's side was T-boned pretty badly, and we ended up having to go to the hospital where he contacted his roommate, who then contacted my date's girlfriend. After my freshman year of college, I met a guy on OkCupid, and we went to get dinner at Fridays as our first date. Offered to give me a ride, but I said no. He was a couple of years older, well-dressed, and started talking about how he'd started his own business after college, and it was going well. Good for him. Bragging a bit, but hey, that's an accomplishment. So after we order, he says, "Let's play a game. We'll each take out our wallets and compare what's in them." Wasn't a joke, literally just started showing me his credit cards and bragging about the high limits, ending with a, "Clearly, you can't afford to pay for this dinner, but don't worry, I could cover you." I was annoyed and protested, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. So as we leave, he says he wants to show me his car. Unfortunately, it was before mine in the lot, so I had to walk by. It was a white, windowless serial killer van. He begged me to bang him in it, right there in the Fridays parking lot. I was pretty glad I drove separately. A guy I met 3 days previously offered to pick me up and hang out. I was cool with that, but he ended up dragging me around on errands. We went to his dentist appointment, and then when I said I wanted to leave, he said he'd give me a ride home, but only in exchange for oral fun times. I was pretty scared about dating after that. And no, I did not take him up on his offer. I got out right there and walked to a bus stop. I went on a date with a guy that I met online. He told me to dress nice and that he was going to take me out for dinner. He took me to Subway, ordered a foot-long teriyaki chicken sub, looked at me and said, "I hope you like teriyaki chicken." We shared the sub in his car. Safe to say, there was no second date. Narrator here, so you're telling me my main dating strategy is wrong? Went to pick up a girl at her house after meeting on a dating website. She seemed significantly larger than her photo, but only in the lower abdominal region. This is when I realized that she had failed to mention that she was pregnant. Guy I worked with kept asking me out. I continuously said no. After about a year, I started to feel bad for the guy and said yes to a date. He asked me to lunch, so I figured it could be a quick, easy date. He picked me up and took me to Wendy's, where he made me order off the dollar menu, and I could only get 2 things. After this very quiet lunch where he hunkered over his chicken nuggets like I would steal them, he said he needed to stop at Walmart. We go in and he heads to the lotion section. Strange, but whatevs. He then grabs 2 scented lotions and asks which one I like better. Being nice, I pick one, and he responds with, "Great, I'll use this for your massage." Luckily, I had to work in 2 hours and told him the massage would have to wait. I spent 3 months trying to avoid him until he quit. Well, I had this major crush on this girl. She was gothish, which isn't my thing normally, but this woman was extremely intelligent and cool. So the first date is good, we have a good time, we're both drunk, and we go back to my place. Mind you, she's very open with her sexuality, so things get hot and heavy. Right when the action is going to start, she says, "I don't actually want to do this." Imagine a semi-truck slamming on its brakes. "Okay," I say, "that's fine. We just sleep off our drink." This exact same thing happens a second time, and I'm starting to get annoyed, only because it's painfully obvious that our mutual actions during the date are leading to adult fun times. Finally, it happens a third time, and I decide I'm over this girl. About a year later, I find out from her friend that she was hoping I would act out an unspeakable act. She wants me to be like, "Screw that, we're doing this." I pointed out that this would in fact constitute an actual unspeakable act, not acting one out. I then found out she had herpes, so in the end, me for the win. On my first date with a guy off an internet dating site, he took us to the Scientology Museum in London. I thought, original, easy to find things to talk about, laugh at the craziness of this, it could be fun. He then proceeds to read every single piece of writing on every single exhibit, ask the attendant very probing questions about how one goes about joining Scientology, etc., etc., and sounding slightly too interested to just be intrigued about religion. Also, he was visibly sweating. Once we were done there, we went for a glass of wine, and he told me he used to shoot heroin. I was out of there like a shot. In college, this guy from one of my classes asked me to go out with him out of the blue. We'd never even talked before, but he was pretty cute, so I said sure. We exchanged numbers, and he said he'd call me with details. He called the next day and told me we were going to a restaurant that was way out of my price range. We're talking like, no way this bill will be under $100. I tried talking him out of it, and when that didn't work, flat out saying I couldn't afford something like that. But he insists and tells me not to worry. This all really should have been a clue to me. So I say fine, and we agree to go. We get to the restaurant, and waiter comes over, and I go to order, the cheapest thing on the menu, when he stops me and says, "Ignore her. We're both having the steak." But I don't like steak. "She's just saying that because she's poor. We'll have steak." And shoos the waiter away. I'm mortified and angry and want to leave, but he was my ride. He tries to make conversation and just proves to me that he really is a butt. He then says that he has to go to the bathroom and leaves. I'm sitting there for a good 10 minutes before he texts me, "Ha ha ha, I got the squirts from drinking last night. Don't eat without me." And that was the last straw. I call the waiter over, pay for my meal, and go to the Starbucks down the street to call my friend to pick me up. In summary, guy was trying to impress me and was the world's biggest butt. Just to clear some things up, I paid for just my meal, not his, and I'm well aware I didn't owe him anything. I just wanted to make a clean break from this guy. I know for a fact that bad dates are not a gender-exclusive experience, but I can't help noticing that the girls seem to have a disproportionate number of horror stories in this thread. Funny that. I went on a few dates with a guy in college. At first I was excited because I found him attractive and he said yes to a dinner date. Turns out even attractive people can be a bag of crazy. First we go out to an Italian restaurant. He orders spaghetti with regular sauce, no meatballs. Out of curiosity, I ask if he's tried anything else on the menu he could recommend. Nope, I only ever order spaghetti. Food comes and he proceeds to lean over his plate, shovel the spaghetti in his mouth and use his lips to cut the rest back on his plate. I'm no snob. I've eaten spaghetti like that before. Just never in public. He says it's the right way to eat it. He asks if I'd like to go see a movie. I'm not feeling the vibe, so I decline, make up some project I need to finish. He tells me he loves the movies, wishes he could just live in one all the time. Alright, well, thanks for the date. A week later, he asks me out again. I decide to give him another shot. Maybe I was being overly judgmental or petty. We agree to go out for a pizza and see a movie. I pick him up at his house and we go to Pizza Hut at his insistence. Best pizza on the planet, he tells me about 3 times on the way there. We get there and he orders a personal pan for himself. That was a first. Okay, he didn't want to share the bill maybe. I order one for myself and just let it go. Again, worrying maybe I'm being judgy. Bill comes and he pays, so now I'm really confused, but whatever. I'm not going to call him out, not worth it. Movie ended up being back at his house where, surprise, he lives with his parents. His dad asks me what I'm in school for, and when I tell him, he lectures me that I should go to school for teaching, since that's what he does. Okay, nice meeting you. We never did watch the movie, spent the rest of the evening with him showing me all his WWF wrestling memorabilia and bossing his mother around Cartman style. His life goal was to get his old job at Blockbuster back, since it was the most fun he'd ever have. His favorite way to spend Christmas was when his mum let him open everything the night before, so he could spend the day at the movies, avoiding all the relatives that come over for Christmas dinner. He hated everything his mother cooked, and counted off to me the only 10 foods he would ever eat, hated everything else, and didn't even need to try it. Did I mention he was 27 years old? A few days later, he invites me out to coffee, and I agree so I can tell him I won't be going on any more dates with him. He was nice enough, and even though he was an oddball, we never got each other to laugh. All our conversations were dry, no shared interests, and he didn't have the same values on the importance of family, so this wasn't going to work. We meet up and he orders a meal while I get my coffee. I tell him that I enjoyed our dates, but I won't be seeing him again. He yells, "So you're breaking up with me?" No, we're not anything official. "I can't believe you're dumping me." And he storms out, leaving his food behind half-eaten. I sit there for a few minutes kind of stunned, slightly amused, but okay, life goes on. A few weeks go by and now it's the holidays. I run into him again and this time we do hit it off. He seems to laugh easier, tells a good joke, etc. He asks what I'm doing for New Year's and I invite him to the party I was going to. I figure, hey, maybe we can at least be friends. I tell him about the other girls that will be there and he seems to get the hint that we aren't going as a couple. We get to the party and he loudly declares that he doesn't drink. That's fine, no one reacts, no biggie. He sits in the corner refusing to acknowledge anyone. He seems upset for some reason, so I ask him what's wrong. He's upset because the movie trivia we were playing earlier had a mistake in it. Alright, we'll get the info off the box and write to them. He seems to cheer up after this. Later he sneaks into the kitchen and begins to prepare himself a mixed drink by pouring a little of everything into a glass. He doesn't notice me and he's talking to himself going, "Yeah, a little of this, ooh, maybe some of that," and he takes a sip of his rum, cranberry, Malibu, Dr. Pepper, orange juice, mint schnapps with a splash of tap water, and pours the rest down the drain. I don't think he wanted to admit that he didn't know how alcohol worked. On the drive home the next morning, he pretended to have a hangover and didn't talk much. I'm driving and the roads are icy, so I'm not minding the silence. About 30 minutes left in the trip, and he asks me what I want to do with my college degree. I tell him my plans and stuff I'm excited to do. He then says, "I don't see the point of you wasting your time getting a degree. You'll just be spending the rest of your life raising my children and cooking me meals that I like." It took all I had not to dump him off right there on the freeway. He continues to say demeaning nonsense about our future, how he'll convince me to drop out of college, how pointless it is for all women to get degrees, blah, blah, blah. My ears begin ringing with rage. I've never had someone say anything so outrightly unsupportive or sexist like that to my face. I knew he had some strange social issues, maybe some anxiety about trying new things, but this was too much. I calmly told him I was not going to be told my lot in life is to raise his babies on his part-time Blockbuster paycheck. I didn't say another word to him, just dropped him off at his car and drove off. I did learn never to feel obligated to put up with someone's bullcrap. I kept giving him chances when I shouldn't have. But in the end, I think I needed to learn that lesson. Now I'm really careful about not leading men on, especially if they have poor social skills. There's been a few, but the absolute worst was the woman who turned up to the pub with literally no money, expecting me to buy her drinks and dinner. I wouldn't have minded if she had told me beforehand, but this was completely out of the blue. So anyway, we sat there making awkward conversation, or at least I tried to start a conversation, told her about my life, asked her questions. She was too busy texting and phoning her friends to really take notice. So eventually we did get talking, then out of nowhere she told me that she killed her dog. Not accidentally either. I just upped and left and avoided all contact. That was 2 years ago. Ah, the Irish goodbye, effective for parties, conversations with your racist grandparents, and antisocial dates who have killed and for all we know, eaten their dogs. There are some worthwhile theories about this lady in the comments. She just wanted a free meal but didn't want a date. Jenny, how do I get out of this date? Tell him you killed your dog, lol. With dating, you have to avoid people who are just hungry. I had just gotten into college and was single, so I couldn't wait to meet some girls there. I sat next to a really cool girl in German class, very outdoorsy, went camping a lot, which is awesome. I do too. On the last night of a project we were working on together, I gathered the nerve to ask her out and she quickly said, "Sure." I picked her up the next night, and we go to dinner. Everything is going great, had some good small talk, laughed quite a bit. Then the food arrives. She immediately pulls out a Bible from her purse and says we should recite a passage before eating. I'm an atheist, but I don't really mind if a person is religious. I refuse to judge anyone on that basis alone. So we recite a verse, thank the Lord for our meal, etc. As soon as I start eating, the first question she asks is, "Have you found a good church around here? I've been to a couple, but I don't really like them." I froze like a deer in the headlights. I've never been to church in my entire life, so I have no clue as to what she would think is a good church. After contemplating what to say for a second, I decide to just tell her I'm an atheist. I mean, heck, I don't care that she's religious and said a Bible verse or prayer before the meal, so maybe she won't care that I'm an atheist, right? Not even close. She gives me this weird, evil, astonished look, immediately grabs her Bible, flips through it for a second and starts quoting a passage about sinners going to hell. I knew I should have gotten up and left right away, but I have an entire steak I just paid $25 for sitting in front of me. I hurry up and down the steak, potatoes, and vegetables in about 10 minutes. During these 10 minutes, she's still reciting passages, talking about how I'm going to hell. I just nodded and continued inhaling my food. Pulled out a piece of paper with about 5 cab companies' phone numbers on it, grabbed about $75, threw it on the table. The only thing I said to her was, "That should be plenty of money to pay for dinner and get you a cab home." The next day, she texted me and sort of apologized. By sort of, I mean the text read something like, "I didn't mean to offend you, but you need to recant your sins or spend eternity in hell." Next day, I'm off to German class, wondering what may happen when I see her. Oddly enough, she wasn't there. Next day comes and not there again. I asked the professor if she had received word as to why she hadn't shown up, and the teacher told me that she had dropped the class the day before. That was a relief. Now fast forward 4 years, and I'm a senior at a random bar near campus. And guess who is there drunk out of her mind? Yep, it's the good old religious girl. I try to stay away from her, but she spots me, runs up to me, and hugs me, which I find very strange. I don't hold grudges, so I hug her back. She buys me a drink I didn't ask for, but I accept because I'm fairly broke. She damn near demands I drink it with her, so whatever, I'll do it. I try to be a nice guy from time to time. Not more than 10 minutes later, she says, "We should go back to my place and hang out," while rubbing her hand up my thigh. I turn around, point to my girlfriend and say, "See her? That's my girlfriend, and she has never cared that I'm an atheist. Thanks for the drink." Walked away and never saw her again. In summary, religious girl claims I'm going to hell for being an atheist on our first date. 4 years later, she's drunk at a bar trying to take me home with her for adult fun times. Teachers, what's your "that student definitely isn't going places" moment? As a getting to know you activity, I asked students, if you could be anyone in history, who would you be and why? One student's answer, "Eleanor Roosevelt, because I've always wanted to be black." Asked my student, 7th grade life science, why he has Fs in all of his classes and why he doesn't bother to care about it. He proceeds to tell me with the most confident smile that he's making it into the NBA. I assigned students to do a group presentation of a story from mythology at the end of the school year. I told them they could choose from Greek, Roman, Egyptian, Norse, or any other system they chose. 2 students chose a story from Norse mythology about Thor. They presented the story, which included characters like Loki, Captain America, Iron Man, etc., completely seriously. I spoke to them at the end of the class and they had no clue that Marvel Cinematic Universe was not a part of Norse mythology. Used to teach English in Japan. Had a 4-year-old kid who would run at top speed toward the wall, throw himself into it, stumble around going, "ouch," for a few seconds, then do it all again, for an hour straight if we would let him. Had a 7-year-old who stripped off down to his underpants, then skipped around the room singing the Pokemon theme song for the whole class. Finally got him dressed up again just as the lesson ended. He looked up at me and said in complete seriousness, "Sensei, I did a good job." Had a 12-year-old kid who would take off his socks and chew on his toenails in the middle of my lessons. Kids, man, they're weird. I think, due to the behavior of the 4-year-old, there was a modest to good chance all of these were the same kid. It's not uncommon as a teacher to have students who are a bit behind the curve in certain aspects, but 99.9999% of the time, they are keen on something. They might not understand how to identify a noun or what theme is, but they somehow know how to make a mean plate of nachos. You learn pretty quick not to judge fish for their tree climbing ability, you know? I thought this was the rule when I was teaching until I met Kevin. Kevin isn't his real name, but it doesn't matter because he can't spell it anyway. Kevin was a student of mine during my last year of teaching. He came to my classroom with very little to show for his academic past. He had moved a few times and thus was missing a lot of typical test scores that we used to try and ballpark their ability. Don't worry, it was a ballpark. We didn't make major decisions until we actually had a chance to talk to and work with a student for a bit. I thought, that's fine, I'll just do some one-on-one with Kevin and see what's up. One-on-one with Kevin was like conversing with someone who'd forgotten everything in a freak, if not impossible, amnesia accident. There was no evidence that he had learned anything past the 2nd grade, and now he was in the 9th grade. Flabbergasted, I figured we needed to get more serious with this. If he was going to be in my class, I needed to know why and how. I decided to meet with him, his guidance counselor, his parents, and another teacher to see what was really going on. This is where it all became clear. It was by some incredible fluke that his family hadn't been wiped off the face of the earth years ago. Odds are his entire heritage was based on blind luck and some type of sick divine intervention that saves his family every time a threat presents itself. Kevin was the genetic pinnacle of this null achievement. Even my instructional lead, a woman who could find a redeeming trait in a Balrog, failed to see any reason this kid or his family should be alive today. So here's a list of events that made it abundantly clear that God exists and he's laughing uncontrollably. Kevin frequently forgot when and where class was. On more than one occasion, I had to retrieve him from other classrooms. Kevin ate an entire 24-pack of crayons, puked, and then did it again the next day. This is 9th grade. I have no idea where he got crayons. Kevin's dad wrote tuition checks and mailed them to me, his English teacher. This was a public school. When I gave it back to Kevin, voided, to give to his dad with a brief note explaining that this is a public school, Kevin got in trouble for trying to spend it at a 7-Eleven after school. Kevin was removed from the culinary arts program after leaving a cutting board on the gas stove and starting a fire. Twice. Kevin threw his lunch at the school resource officer and tried to run away. He ran into a door and insisted it wasn't him. Kevin stole my phone during class. I called it. It rang. He denied it was ringing. Not that it wasn't his, not that he did it, no. No, he denied that the phone was actually ringing. He tried 3 times before the end of the year. Kevin called the female basketball coach a mother-flipping B-word during gym. Basketball tryouts were that afternoon. Kevin tried out. It didn't go well. Kevin's mum could never remember which school he went to. She missed several meetings because she drove to other schools, none of which he ever went to. Kevin tased himself in the neck before a football game. Kevin kept a bottle of orange Kool-Aid in his backpack for about 4 months. He thought it would turn into alcohol. He drank it during homeroom and threw up. Kevin said the N-word a lot. Kevin was white. The high school was 84% black. Kevin got beat up a lot. Kevin stole another student's iPhone and tried to sell it back to them. Kevin didn't understand that his grade was dependent on tests, quizzes, homework, classwork, and participation. Kevin finished his first semester with a 3% average. He tried to bribe me with $11. Kevin spit on a girl and said, "You should get out of those wet clothes." The girl was the Spanish student teacher. Kevin didn't know dogs and cats were different animals. Kevin tried to download adult flicks onto a computer in the library, at the circulation desk, while he was logged on. Kevin asked a girl to prom, he was in the 9th grade and freshmen don't go to prom, by asking for her phone number and then texting her his address. Kevin got gum in his hair constantly. Kevin regularly tried to cheat on assignments by knocking the pile over, grabbing one before I had picked them all up, and then writing his name on it wherever there was room. Kevin had several allergies, but neither his parents nor he could remember what they were. They were very concerned that the holiday party, it's high school, we don't have those, would have peanuts. When they finally got a doctor's note, he was allergic to amoxicillin. Kevin and his parents took a trip to Nassau. How the F did they even get airline tickets? And forgot all their luggage at home. I didn't believe him when he told me until I talked to his mum, who told me first thing when I saw her at the bi-weekly meeting. Kevin's grandfather apparently died in a chainsaw accident. I can only assume God was looking the other way that day. Folks, I would be ashamed to tell you how many takes that story took me because I was just laughing so much. Oh, Kevin, I can only hope that your savings of $11 from the rejected bribe afforded you some small comfort in your life after school. In the last few weeks before the AP exam, I gave my classes a series of practice tests, written by College Board, to take in class under a time constraint to give them practice. One student, let's call him Bill, always tried to cheat in my class. I'd gotten sick of putting in the effort to catch him, and it didn't matter because the entire point of the class was to prepare for the AP exam. Bill started off each test by staring at the page and answering 1 or 2 questions. Then, as always, he asked to go to the bathroom during the test. I let him go and he took his phone, of course. He returns and frantically bubbles in the rest of the test and turns it in early. I have to hand it to him, Bill was great at memorizing letters for the answers of the practice tests, but he failed the AP exam. This isn't really the kids' fault, more the parents, but my sister teaches in Hong Kong, generally 3 to 4-year-olds. And she had this one kid, called Enzo, if I remember right, who kept acting out, completely ignoring my sister and her TA when they spoke to him, and doing badly in the classwork they're given. He also didn't speak, like, at all, tended to play by himself. So my sister called in his parents to discuss it, voiced her concerns that there might be behavioral problems, maybe something deeper seated. His parents then confided in her that it's probably not that. More that the kid didn't speak a lick of English or Cantonese, i.e., the 2 languages used in the school and most of Hong Kong. They were both relatively affluent Italians, so they'd raised the kid speaking Italian and lied that he spoke English fluently so he could get admitted into the school, as it was a requirement that they had to have a basic understanding, if I recall correctly. My sister raised her concerns with the principal after she had the meeting, and they responded by just moving the kid to another class. She said she still sees him sitting alone during lunch breaks. I really feel for the kid though. He's only young, and he's pretty much been alienated and won't learn properly, because his parents are so dead set on shoving him into the most expensive school, assuming that he'll learn well. Not a teacher, but in one of my health and sex ed classes, a girl in my class said she wasn't afraid of getting AIDS, because if she got it, she'd just give it to someone else, and therefore not have it anymore. Yeah, that was an interesting day once we realized she was serious. A university freshman turned in a paper on the Treaty of Versailles that conformed to no known formatting system I had ever seen. There didn't even seem to be paragraphs. Assuming that his computer had jumbled it up somehow when he turned it in, I went to give it back to him in class one day so he could fix it. He informed me it was intentional. The format meant that the paper was meant to be read as a rap, which he proceeded to do for me in the few minutes before class started. It was incredible. D+. I always thought that Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton was truly a musical beyond reproach. I now see that he may have caused some issues in the schooling system. Okay, so I had a student in middle school that couldn't read. That wasn't a huge deal. Kid had issues. Once he got angry at me and told me he was going to rip off my buttons. It may have been literal or figurative. Didn't matter. Remember, issues. It was my job to teach him to read. He should have already been in high school. He was 14 and in middle school. I worked individually with this kid every day. Finally, I just asked him what he was going to do for a living, if he couldn't read and wouldn't try. He gave me a pretty standard answer. I'll play basketball or sell drugs. I should mention that he was barely over 5 foot tall. I worried about him. He was my student for 2 years. Eventually, he moved on and I switched high school. So 20 years later, I got curious. I remember most of my students, and this kid had a name that stood out a bit. I Google his name, hoping he won't be in prison. A lot of my former students are. I find him right away. He's a professional basketball player. For Ukraine. Retired now, but still, good for him. Made himself proud. As a note, he turned 15 in middle school. He did learn how to read. He graduated and went to college. Apparently he struggled for a while, but he's human. His history was not ideal. I'm concerned about naming him because of his privacy. He played from 2006 to 2010. One of the fellas in my university first-year computer programming class stared at the wall. The same spot. The whole class. Every class. He'd walk in on time, sit down, open his folder, and stare at the wall, and didn't ever take a note that I saw. At the end of the wall-staring duration of the class, he'd close his likely still blank folder, get up, and leave without a word. I see him from time to time at the grocery store, collecting up the carts. I feel a little bad for whoever funded his education, but am pleased that he has a steady job. My 8th grade physical science lab partner took the top off one of those oil burners, poured the oil all over our desk, and then lit it on fire. Like on purpose. Did you think it would be less flammable because it's on the table now? Hilariously, even though I was the one who put the fire out and had nothing to do with lighting it, I still got suspended too. I guess the lesson I was supposed to learn was never help put out a fire. Here's one from my mum. The class ate at one of those medieval-themed restaurants on a field trip, and one little brat took advantage of the setting and the overflowing cleavage. He referred to the waitress as his wench and demanded that she butter his bread, all so she would bend over to better reveal her bountiful bosom. He ordered the turkey legs, then wielded them theatrically like Henry VIII, while thanking the waitress for giving him a bone. When my mum got home, she said he was a sexual harassment lawsuit waiting to happen. I'm late, but I have a winner. The class was an applied math course for high schoolers, and we held a paper airplane design contest. The rule was that you could use anything on the table to make your airplane, and that the person who threw theirs the furthest down the hallway would win. The table had all manner of things on it: printer paper, construction paper, tape, rulers, compasses, toothpicks, duct tape, paper clips, masking tape, a stapler, and even Elmer's glue. Well, the class went to work and for an hour designed some very interesting airplanes. Except for Tim. Tim sat quietly and chatted with his friends until about 30 seconds were left to build. Then he went up to the table, grabbed a few things, and sat back down to wait. When it came time to throw, it turned out that his airplane was a piece of paper wrapped around the stapler, while the lighter and more complex planes drifted to the side and landed early or hit the hallway walls. Tim's plane slammed straight into the door on the other side of the hall, with a satisfying clunk. Tim's ridiculous creation beat everyone else out and won the contest easily, while technically obeying the rules of the competition. I hope that guy ends up working for NASA. My other favorite student was a kid who ate a glue stick for $5. He figured it was edible because it said non-toxic. Technically correct, but so wrong. He had to go home due to the uncontrollable vomiting. I'm not sure if he was ever paid the $5. My third favorite was a middle schooler whose mum was dissed by another student in class. His reaction, not having any decent weapons on him, was to rip out the 3-ring part of a 3-ring binder and use the prongs to attack the other student's forearm. Unfortunately, that kid isn't going anywhere but juvie unless he can help with his anger issues. Too bad, because it was an ingenious improvised weapon, and he probably could have used that creativity some other way. Kindergarten teacher. Testing students on community helpers, asked a student to name 3 community helpers. Child responds, "Firefighter man." Now I really thought, yes, she's got this in the bag. A hot dog and a monkey. No. Kiss your brain though. Blatant and low-effort plagiarism. Like it's literally the first Google result if you search topic, example essay. But they add their name in a different font and size, which should make it obvious at a glance, as if the use of capitalization and punctuation wasn't a dead giveaway that they didn't write it. I had a student pull that last year, while his even dumber buddy didn't even put his name in it. In fact, it wasn't even an essay, it was a selection of question prompts. Basically, 2 Kevins in one class. I also had a kid at the very end of the day continually F around with his skateboard and become very hostile when I insisted on holding it until the last bell. He ran out the door, jumped on it, and promptly fell and broke his jaw. His parents then threatened to sue the school because he got hurt there doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. Oh, this is a great one. Twice this week, the same student brought a popsicle in to have as a snack for lunch. Needless to say, he was very disappointed. His mum might actually pack his lunch. Blatant, low-effort plagiarism is not exclusive to younger students. Look forward to it all the way through university. As for the popsicle kid, that seems like another case of neglectful parenting. Been a history teacher for 3 months and was teaching about the Middle Colonies and how it was the breadbasket of America. The next day as a warm-up, I ask what the breadbasket is. She rose her hand without her even skipping a beat and starts going off about how I'm so dumb because it's called the chicken basket, where you get your tenders, 2 sides, and it also comes with bread, but that isn't what it's called. This poor girl has a lot more stories. This is just the one that stands out to me the most. Other stories include wondering how Obama was the first black president because she also thought Abraham Lincoln was black. Her reasoning behind it all was that he was really, really tall. Granted, she's also black, so yeah. Along with that, I've had to explain that we did have color back then. She couldn't believe that people before the 1950s still had color, as the only TVs and photos were black and white. She constantly calls people cockatoos. 3 weeks ago, she asked which history I'm teaching. I honestly don't know if I really suck as a teacher or if it's her. Mind you guys, I do teach 8th grade US history. I wanted to believe all kids are smart, but I'm just slowly not going to hold on to that belief anymore. These are the highlights. Ask again next year and I'll have stories from multiple kids. I want to reap in that sweet, sweet karma. Not a teacher, but I work as a bouncer, and on Saturday some girl was persistently trying to get into my bar, but looked young and didn't have ID with her. After telling her no about 30 times and her complaining about everyone hating on her, a guy walked in and told us he's one of her high school teachers and that she's 17. She took off awfully quick when he showed up, and I can only imagine how things went in school today. I once had a couple of exchange students steal from my store when I was managing a Lids. They walked out the store and we followed closely after them. We turned the corner and they were stopped talking to their teacher. We patiently waited while they finished talking to the teacher, all while getting strange looks from him. He started to walk away, and we immediately tell the kids we need the hats they stole, to which they replied, "We will give them back, but we can do it somewhere else. That's our teacher." Like I was going to cut them a break after they stole. Teacher notices that there is a problem and comes back and absolutely laid into them, telling them they were going to go to jail and get expelled. We had no intent of pressing charges, they were only around 15 and stole 2 hats, but my God, if that teacher didn't put the fear of God into them. It turns out they were spoiled rich kids from another country who actually had the money to pay, but thought stealing would be cooler. We ended up getting a call from the school. They had to write an apology letter for us, and they had to do 30 hours of volunteer work for the charity of our choice. They threatened to shut down the school's exchange program because of them as well, but I never heard of what came of it after that. Worked with 3-year-olds. One was crying and pointing at another kid, so I asked what happens. She mostly speaks Spanish but understands English, so I started asking her, "Are you hurt?" "Yes." "Did she hit you?" "Yes." "Did she kick you?" "Yes." Then the other child chimes in, "Nuh-uh, I didn't kick her, I just punched her in the face." My sister is a teacher from a local school. Like many great teachers, she's also responsible for a form group. In this case, a rowdy and rambunctious group of 15-year-olds she'd inherited from a newly retired teacher. Some kids stand out more than others, and not always for the right reasons. The epitome of that rule existed in my sister's form group. She had the misfortune to be called Xena by her Tumblr feminist mother, and Xena herself had followed firmly in her mother's footsteps. She was considered unpopular, and certainly the other kids were unfair and cruel, but she didn't help matters herself. My sister has told many stories of Xena, up to and including the time she spontaneously began speaking in an accent, which sounded like the illegitimate offspring of a Pakistani accent, Irish, and a speech impediment. The accent vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared over the course of the lunch hour. The time she claimed the powers of clairvoyance in chemistry. The kid torching pencils with a Bunsen burner apparently never particularly cared if their great-aunt Doreen wanted to warn them of misfortune. The time she shaved her head and refused to wear her uniform because it was stifling her creativity. The John Cena meme was in full swing, and Xena had earned the nickname owing to her buzz cut and unfortunate head shape. Kids would hum his theme tune upon seeing Xena in the school. A memo was sent around the faculty concerning the matter, but half of the staff were convinced that John Cena was a politician. My sister was running improvisation drills when Xena broke in with one of her prime stories. She was the daughter of a Mauritian man named Jonathan, she said. Her skin was the color of milk, smooth and pale. Jonathan was a man of great importance. She had been born in Mauritius and swiftly smuggled over to the UK with her mother. As a newborn. Born and raised in England, by the way. There was a beat of stunned, awkward silence until a particular crapbag of a child screeched, "John Cena!" and slammed his mate's head into the desk. When was your last, "I've got to get the hell out of here" moment? It was years ago when I was in 4th grade. My parents used to get into fights all the time, especially when my dad was drinking. They'd start yelling and that would turn into actual fistfights. At this time we were living in a small trailer, and the room I shared with all 3 of my siblings was the one at the end of the trailer, near the back door. So my dad comes home drunk, mum is angry and starts yelling, and it escalates from there. Being on a small trailer, everything sounds so close and terrifying, and as the oldest of the 4, I felt the need to protect my siblings, but I didn't know what to do. After a while, my mum starts screaming my name at the top of her lungs, and I can still hear my dad screaming too, and I knew that I needed to get myself and my siblings out of there ASAP. I ushered them out of the room, down the hallway, and out the back door, and told them to head to our aunt's place, who lived a few trailers down. My mum was still screaming for me, and all I knew to do was yell, "I got them out, Mum! We're leaving!" before also going out the back to my aunt's. I don't recall ever being that scared. Cops came and they both went to jail and were both out in a couple of days and acted like nothing had ever happened. A few years ago, I brought the incident up to my mum. I told her that I thought she was screaming at me to get the siblings out of the house, and that's why I had. She told me she was screaming my name because she was scared and wanted help, and didn't know who else to call for. I felt so bad because I didn't help her, but there's really not much I could have done. I worked in a factory that made large plastic items via filling molds with powder and sending into a giant industrial oven that turned to 550 degrees Fahrenheit. At the end of the week, I was cleaning said oven and my boss, not knowing I was inside, turned it on. At the sound of hydraulic doors closing, I dove out of the oven as they closed and avoided free cremation. I both got the hell out of that oven and that company pretty quick. In the fall, I was walking down the trail in the woods during the middle of the day. A raccoon was sitting in the middle of the trail facing us, sitting on its butt, head kind of lowered, bugs buzzing all around it. It didn't move at all. It just stared at us. We decided to turn around. I don't know what rabies looks like, but that's not how I want to find out. On the New York City subway, I watched a grown man pull his pants down and use the support rod in the middle of the train as leverage to take a wicked, steamy dump while making aggressive eye contact with me and a few other passengers. Hey, when you gotta go, you've gotta go, man. I gave my ex a ride to his court hearing for hitting my daughter. I pointed out to him that inside there was a sign that said no cell phones, and that I would run our phones out to the car and be right back. I felt like my heart was going to break my sternum and I had tunnel vision as I had called my sister and told her I needed her and her husband to come with their pickup truck to my house right now because I had a small window to get as much of my daughter's and my possessions out of my house before he was released from court. Just as we were wrapping up, I saw him running down the street like Usain Bolt right for me. I yelled for them to drop what they had and get in the truck and go. Just as I close my car door, he runs and tries to smash it open. I fumble with my keys to get the engine started. He then stands in front of my car, blocking my path. I dismissed my burning desire to run him over and threw it in reverse and smashed the gas pedal down the block to the next street. I'd like to say things got better after that, but that was just the beginning of the worst year of my life. Now I'm past all of that and living a better life. I was at a marketing recruitment presentation in college, and this guy started talking about how we would be able to go to Disneyland and buy Ferraris if we just signed up for his exclusive elite program. We just had to make a small down payment right there in the auditorium, and we shouldn't talk about it with friends or family because haters online had damaged the company's reputation. It was Amway, and the guy was Charlie D'Urso. Was in New Orleans interviewing for a job that required driving a company vehicle 10 hours a day that had valuable specialty equipment. Interview was going great and we get to the part about pay. Guy goes, "We can offer you $10 an hour." A big smile came over my face and I leaned over to shake his hand. He thought I was agreeing. I was telling him bye. Popeyes pays around $15 an hour here. My mum was content living with bedbugs, a creepy 50-year-old man who might pay our bills, as well as his kids and our cousins, all in a crappy mobile home that she hadn't been making payments on. It was in such bad shape, it wasn't even worth repossessing. I could never have any time to myself. I was always surrounded by bratty kids while constantly scratching at the bite marks the bugs had left. I'd go to bed at night wearing sweats with socks on hot nights just to try and keep the damn bugs off me. It didn't work. When I was around 14, I went to go live with my grandma. Of course, that made me a backstabber in the eyes of my mum, but she's not relevant in my life anymore. I pulled into a gas station to fill up my car at 4 a.m. on the way to work. The station was well lit and actually pretty busy, so I didn't feel unsafe. I pulled up next to a pump, got out, and just when I put the nozzle in, I heard someone trying to get my attention. He asked if I could call his girlfriend to come pick him up. I called one number, voicemail box full. He gave me a second number, mailbox also full. Then he asked if I had jumper cables and if I could give him a jump. I agreed, thinking the van he was nearby was his vehicle. Then, after I agree, he tells me the story of how he got there. According to him, his car had broken down at another gas station up the street. He said it was closed, so he couldn't get any help. So he borrowed a bike from someone and rode it down to this gas station. Then he went into the gas station to leave the bike there. As soon as he started walking away, my brain started racing and pointing out all the things that didn't add up about the story. First, all I could imagine in those voicemail boxes were a bunch of people going, "Your boyfriend is stuck at a gas station." Then I thought about how in the hell he would legitimately borrow a bike from someone at a closed gas station, in the middle of night, in the middle of winter. At that point, I decided it was time to get the F out of there. Thankfully, I hadn't pumped any gas yet, so I quickly put it back on the pump, got in my car, and tore out of there. I actually felt a little bad because what if he actually needed help? But then I reminded myself about him borrowing a bike in that situation, how he was trying to get me to a dark, secluded secondary location. This dude was absolutely trying to rob and murder me. I was visiting London and just got out of a sports bar by myself at 3 a.m, drunk as crap. I decide to walk from the bar, near Leicester Square, to my hotel, near King's Cross, despite not knowing exactly where I am or how to get to the hotel. I start walking in a direction, and within a minute I'm walking down a rather wide shopping street, when I see two bald guys coming the other way, both pretty much built brick crap houses, and looking like they want to start crap. They hadn't spotted me yet, but one guy suddenly walks to the side of the street and just flat out punches the steel grate in the front of a shop entrance as hard as he can. I pretty much did a straight 180, double-timed it back to the bar, and asked the nice bouncers to get me a cab. Cab drops me off right in front of the hotel, and I go to bed without getting the crap kicked out of me first. Although it's entirely reasonable that those large, shaven-headed gentlemen were simply steel-grate integrity enthusiasts, I don't blame you for noping the heck on out of there. I go to school in Poughkeepsie. One time my friends and I were walking along some train tracks by the river on a foggy night. Not smart. We could barely see 5 feet ahead, but we weren't afraid because it was a popular hangout spot. All of a sudden, we hear a loud barking and a flipping crackhead lunges out of the fog at us, barking like a dog. The fog around him cleared up and we could see more druggies lying under some leaves by the side of the tracks, watching us and laughing. Never ran so fast or came so close to crapping my pants in my life. When my now ex-husband called me to tell me the reason he was late for dinner was because he was arrested for pleasuring himself in public, I got out. I'm too old for that crap. My husband came home from a business trip early yesterday and failed to mention it to me. I heard someone jiggling the doorknob and sprinted out the back door. Not getting murdered in my own house. This was like 5 years ago. I was 24 years old, got way too drunk at my local bar, and ended up going back to this guy's apartment. It was decorated by someone's grandmother for sure. There were candelabras everywhere. He lit all of them. Then he sat me on the couch and proceeded to go through all of these old family photo albums, specifically looking at pictures of his siblings and cousins as children. No joke, he was getting so hard that I could see the album start moving up and down. Then he asked me if I had any pictures of when I was a child or my siblings when they were children. Never sobered up so fast and booked it right the F out of there. Because I get replies about drunk driving, this was NYC. I walked 16 blocks through East Harlem and never felt so safe in my life. Oh boy, I have another one. My ex-best friend convinced me to go to a concert with her. I told her I couldn't because I had a long drive the next morning and I didn't want to waste gas or go to bed too late, and she said it was fine. She would drive and would get me home right after the concert. Went to the concert, it was fine. I was ready to go home, but she told me she really wanted to go to an after-party with the band because her crush would be there. I agreed because she really wanted to get with this guy and the chances of it happening seemed high, and I wanted her to be happy. Turns out the after-party was at a decent hotel. Underage kids were straight up walking in with handles of alcohol, and it was really obvious what was going on. The receptionist was eyeing everyone, but nobody gave a frick. My friend and I got to the room. We were the only girls there. Around 40 drunk college guys and 2 girls both under 110 pounds. I'd never experienced being looked at like a juicy steak until that moment. I told her we had to go, but she was hell-bent on staying with her crush. I couldn't convince her, so I called my mum, the most awkward phone conversation of my life, and had her pick me up. Turns out the receptionist called the cops soon after I left, and the party got broken up. I think some people got charged. Last week, I was visiting Los Angeles with my 22-year-old daughter. I had to fill the tank of the rental car. I googled the cheapest gas and waited in line. There was a scummy homeless man yelling, clearly mentally ill. When we got to the pump was broken. You know, when you fill 10 cents of gas and it stops, It took me a full minute to get $1 of gas when the homeless man came up to us. He was yelling, "Now this is a nice car." I grabbed the pump from my daughter and said, "Hit the road!" And we drove off. Funny thing is, my daughter wasn't scared because she was listening to what the man was yelling about. Apparently, the homeless man was being harassed by another driver. The other driver told him not to touch his car. The car was a piece of crap, and the homeless man was making fun of him like, "Oh, don't touch his car. Your car is a piece of crap." That's when he came to our car. "Now this is a nice car. I won't touch this one, but yours is a piece of crap, you butthole." So it ended up being pretty funny. I panicked for nothing. You may have already worked this out, but the narrator had to tone down this individual's language quite a bit so that this video wouldn't get demonetized. I told this once before, but when I was about 8 years old, I was in the car with my parents. They were arguing, which they did a lot, but being trapped in that metal box with them, both of them screaming back and forth, became too much. We stopped at a red light and I unbuckled my seatbelt and got out of the car and started running. My mum, who was in the passenger's seat, ran out after me, and after he pulled over the car, my dad did as well. They caught up to me and their attitudes completely changed. They promised they wouldn't fight again, a promise they broke time and time again until their divorce, but they never did it again in the car. I was at a baseball card convention when news of the incel van attack in Toronto broke. It was a slow afternoon, so a group of us dealers gathered around the lobby TVs to watch, and the other guys started defending him. If he had been an Islamo-terrorist, the frickin' media would have kept that crap under wraps. And, "What do you think's gonna happen when women only go for jerks?" Then the egghead in our group argued that those with less access to women suffer just as much as those with low incomes, and that we should re-educate women to find those men with low sexual market value attractive. I did not want to find out what he meant by re-educate, so I packed up my cards and left. Yes, the women are the problem, not the murderer. Thank God these guys aren't reproducing. Happened a few hours ago. Was in the park with my younger brother just playing football, having a nice time. Suddenly, I see a man looking over in our direction. However, I can't be too sure because I don't have my glasses and I don't want to scare myself for no reason. He's carrying an orange bag, so it's easy to see him. I ignore him and brother and I start walking around randomly. Not following the path, backtracking, just not walking logically, if that makes sense. Kicking the ball to each other. The last time I went to this park on the 1st, a man of the same build and ethnicity followed me, so I felt myself getting paranoid. This man kept his distance, but for instance, we went into the basketball area and he would come to the entrance and lean against the grate, just watching us. He could go behind the trees, it wasn't clear he knew his way around the park, and follow us, which I wouldn't notice if it wasn't for his bag. I wanted to confront him, but I was with my younger brother and didn't want to cause trouble. I wasn't really scared, but more angry and frustrated. The man suddenly starts getting braver and walking faster towards us, so we decide to quickly run home, even though we were only out for 15 minutes. I was at home working on a gate outside. I heard my neighbor shoot off some rounds, so I went to a spot I'd be able to overlook the pond and see if they were getting any of the geese. Then 3 shots came through the bushes right towards my house, roughly 100 feet or so away from me, not towards the pond. So I was like, okay, they're being an idiot. Time to GTFO. I go back to working on the gate about 300 to 400 feet from where I was when I was being stupid and nosy, even though they should not have been firing towards a house. Then a fricking bullet cracked as it went less than 5 feet past my head. Yep, that's when I said, frick this, hid behind a huge-ass tree and called the cops, and waited 45 minutes for them to show up. The guy that I met. College-educated, handsome, retro digs in Long Beach, California. Articulate, funny, packed a picnic for our blind date, complete with cloth napkins. Went back to his place, and the kitchen was a hoarder's dream. At least 6 full sets of dishes, dirty, sitting in neatly stacked piles everywhere. Pots and pans, the same thing. Hundreds of dollars worth of iron cookware, stacked on the floor, rusting. Instead of washing dishes, he would buy more. Noped the F out. I told you I was planning on selling them in bulk. One man's trash is another man's treasure. I have leukemia. I completed 5 months of chemo in October, but my white count has been low since then, so I am high risk of infection. My wife just gave birth a few weeks ago, but had severe preeclampsia and had to be put on blood pressure meds. I went to pick up dinner, and on my way home, I figured I'd also grab her meds at the pharmacy real quick. Except a ton of people had the same thought, and I found myself like 20 people back in line. I was set to wait. Wife definitely needed her meds, until I hear coughing. I look up and a 2-year-old kid is hacking everywhere. That is no bueno for me. Yep, I had to nope the hell out of that line and send my mother-in-law to the pharmacy for wife's meds. In conclusion, I'm a 35-year-old, tattooed, bearded man afraid of small children. I was at work and thought I needed to fart. Turns out it was diarrhea and made up an excuse to leave for the rest of the day. I have also accidentally crapped my pants at work. I had some weird coughing fit and diarrhea. I didn't make up an excuse. I told my manager I just crapped my pants and I'm going effing home. He just said, "Feel better." When I first moved to where I'm living now, it's across the river from a college town/city with a main street that is littered with restaurants and bars. So one night, a couple of friends and I went out and decided to bar hop. Nothing crazy, just wanted to check out the different places. Walked into one hole-in-the-wall joint with only a handful of people in there. Everybody's head turned and looked at us like we were from another planet. Weird vibe immediately, asking how we're doing and what he can get us. We order our round of drinks. Bartender very slowly says, "Is that all?" Again, weird vibe, but whatever. Random guy, later found out to be the owner, comes and sits next to us and starts chatting us up. Where we're from, what we're doing in the area, if we're cool. Lots of weird conversation starters. At this point, we want out, but our drinks haven't come back yet. So we get our drinks and try to keep to ourselves. Guy keeps asking if he can get us anything at all, off the menu. It's at this point that I realize that the 2 women at the other end are doing coke off the bar. There's also now 2 large men standing against the wall right behind us, just grilling us. Not wanting to make a scene, we all shared talked amongst ourselves for a minute, finished our drinks as fast as possible, paid and left. The owner was trying to talk to us the entire time we were paying and making our way to the door, trying to keep us there as the 2 large men slowly close in. We got the frick out and said nothing until we hit the other side of the street. Grabbing some Waffle House in a not-so-good part of town around 2 a.m. after work. Dude whipped out a gun and was screaming at the chick he was with. Definitely my most gotta get the F out of here moment. A few years later, got a job as a 911 call taker. Same Waffle House got shot up. So there is that. When I realized the shelter I work for is pocketing donated money, keeping and using donations for themselves first, taking their food, taking housing products, all for their own personal use. These people have well-paying jobs with plenty of overtime, benefits like health life and dental. So yeah, screw that place and screw those people. Sucks for the ones that do have to stay there. I'm black. I live near Alabama. A friend was having a party, but she was using a different friend's house as the venue. The house was deep in the woods, and this man at the gas station was being friendly and joking with us. Everything seemed fine until he said something like, "Don't forget the Klan meeting is tonight at 7. I'm kinda blacked out for a second because I'm sure he meant something else, but I got a bad vibe. A company I was working at got bought out by another company. They tried to make us sign agreements that we wouldn't work in the industry for 2 years after working for our company. So I'm not allowed to have a job in my field for 2 years if they lay me off. A bunch of us refused to sign it, but nothing happened. Then people in management started getting moved around, and they put someone in charge of me who was really incompetent. When a big company buys a small company with a lot of name recognition, I can see the writing on the wall. I got another job and got the heck out of there. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description too. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.